Good evening. Tonight's Committee of Adjustment hearing is being held by video conference and live streaming video on the town's live stream webpage at oakville.ca. This is a hearing to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the application that is before the committee, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for a deferral is made and the committee grants such a request, the applicant or authorized agent must contact the Secretary Treasurer to schedule a new hearing date. In order to conduct an effective and efficient electronic hearing, we have adopted the following process. If you're watching the live stream of this hearing on oakville.ca, and if you wish to speak on an item, you can call 905-815-6095. That's 905-815-6095. The phone number is also posted on your screen below the live stream at oakville.ca. Staff will be standing by to take your call. When you call in, staff will ask your name, item number you wish to address, and your telephone number. Further instructions will be provided for you to call back to join the video conference. When the chair of the committee polls for interested parties, press *6 to unmute yourself. The applicant or agent will be given the opportunity to briefly explain to the committee the basis of the application and answer any questions that may arise. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for a presentation. You will need to state your full name and address for the record. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All delegations must also state their full name and address for the record. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided to make your presentation. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. The applicant or agent will then be provided with a further 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by any interested parties and answer any questions from the committee members. If the applicant or agent has any concern found in the staff report, particularly with any proposed conditions, this is your opportunity to advise us. The matter will then be taken into committee for a decision. This will mark the end of all discussion. Any person desiring a notice of decision for an application must also provide a written request, preferably through email, to the Secretary Treasurer. Written notice of the committee's decision will be mailed not later than 10 days for minor variance and 15 days for consents to the applicant and or agent and any other person who filed a written request for such notice. The last day to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal will be noted on the decision. Only the applicant, specified persons, or public bodies may appeal the committee's decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In November 2022, Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, amended the Planning Act to remove appeal rights for members of the public. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding. Secretary Treasurer will then notify the applicant and anyone who received a copy of the decision through written correspondence. People participating in this hearing are to be courteous to and respectful of the members of the committee, town staff, and the other people participating in the electronic hearing. Tonight's electronic hearing is being video recorded and available for future viewing at oakville.ca. Thank you. Committee members, I see we have two regrets tonight, Ms. McHale and Ms. Yu. And I'll now ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest, and I'll start myself. I've got a conflict with CAV A088 at 3280 South Service Road. The applicant is a partner company with my employer. So when that item comes up, I'll ask Mr. Hardcastle to take the chair. Are there any other declarations of interest? I see none. Okay. Madam Secretary Treasurer, I see we have at least one request for deferral tonight. Do we have the applicant?
I'm just
Caroline?
gonna, if we wouldn't mind, the planner has a request. Ms. McKnight has her hand up. If we could just go there first, and then I'll proceed to the attendees that wish to have a deferral.
Okay, thank you. Evening, Ms. McKnight.
Good evening. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer, and good evening, committee members. I would just like to note that staff are requesting a deferral of 1175 Pine Grove Road due to development engineering concerns. We do have development engineering staff here tonight for discussion if there are any questions pertaining to this request.
So just so I'm clear, this is staff requesting a deferral, not the applicant.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. It is staff requesting this deferral.
Okay, Secretary Treasurer, do we have the applicant available?
Which item is this for?
Pine Grove.
It is item
Pine Grove.
6.7.
Okay, I'll just see if Mr. Dell is there. Just one moment. Okay, I've promoted Nicholas Dell to the meeting.
Good evening, Mr. Dell.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just give a brief discussion about this. I know it's a little strange for staff to make a motion on behalf of the applicant. I have instructions to proceed this evening, and I think you'll be compelled to agree. Just quickly, and I'm glad engineering staff is here. There's a remnant channel culvert that staff are interested in swapping land with my client in order to address through public lands instead of private. But, and you can appreciate the speed at which we have to adapt to comments as they come in through this process. But we have scrambled since receiving these comments and have a presentation that will make, I think, the committee and staff comfortable for one reason only, and that is the culvert in question that would be the outlet for this flow from Spears through to Pine Grove is not on our property. And so the land swap that staff are seeking, I don't think would additionally address their concerns unless they're also willing, or not, unless they're going to expropriate the neighbors' lands as well. And there's some conditions on the application related to a development engineering permit application, which is, I think, rather redundant condition since that's something we're going to be doing anyways. And my concern and insistence on moving forward this evening is because I'd like to get into the process so that we can deal with this through the development engineering permit, through the building permit. It is our risk, of course, and always is, to come back to committee if the design changes as a result of some of the grading examinations, but that's always the case, and I would call that a natural part of the process. And it's more important, I think, to put the cart in front of the horse and get our approval for the design this evening so that we can go through the engineering process and sufficiently progress staff's drainage concerns through a permit. Right now, because of Bill 23, I don't have a permit that I can progress my zoning approval through. So I'm here as a first step to get approval on the design and then go forward with accepting the conditions for a DEPA that we'll take up there. And I'm just not sure, Mr. Chair, that staff are aware that the culvert they're seeking to do a land swap about is on our property, because it is not. But more for my presentation later. I just thought I'd give you those high level strokes.
Thank you, Mr. Dell. I'll just make a few comments. I'd say it's your right to proceed if you choose to. I'll obviously poll the committee. I would note that it's unusual for staff to come forward and seek a deferral. If you did seek a deferral, or sorry, if the committee granted a deferral on staff's request, I would suggest that would be done without you as the applicant having to pay the deferral fee, as it's from the town. You're obviously have the right to wish to proceed. You would do so with currently you seeking an approval, staff not supporting that approval. It's at your, I guess, risk to convince the committee and staff through your presentation and to try to get an approval. But if you wish to proceed, I'll just, poll the committee, committee members. You've heard the staff requested a deferral. The applicant wishes to proceed. Are you willing to go with the request of the applicant? So I guess I'll put it this way. All those in favor of proceeding with this file when it comes up at the request of the applicant?
Proceed, yes.
Okay, Mr. Dell, you have your wish. When your matter comes up, you'll be given the opportunity to address the committee and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will see you shortly.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Ms. McKnight. Madam Secretary Treasurer. Items for deferral.
I've promoted Mr. Outred to the meeting.
Good evening, Mr. Outred. See you on the screen. There we go.
Yeah, I apologize about that, Mr. Chair.
No problem.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to defer application number 84, 2024, the application at 3232 Shoreline Drive. The reason for the deferral, thought this was a straightforward application. It's the retention of an existing shed at the back of the property that's been there. We can provide records when we go forward with it since 1990. But planning has issues with it. I think we should probably just deal with planning and provide some more evidence that's been existing for that many years. I would be normally happy to go ahead with this application tonight. I'm just concerned that if we go forward and the committee approves it, that planning could potentially take it to council for appeal. So that would be not necessarily something that I want my clients to have to go forward with. So it's better just to defer it for a short period. I'll provide some additional information to planning. Hopefully we can get some satisfactory comments.
Okay, that's probably why staff seem to be raising more concerns than just the variance that's being requested. Committee members, all those in favor of deferral? That is unanimous. Your application has been deferred. You'll see the Secretary Treasurer when you're ready to come back.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, are there any other requests for deferral?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, committee members, in your hands, when I did my site inspection, I did not see a notice sign posted at 223 Tweedsdale, CAB A34 2023. I don't know if that was your experience as well. Mr. Dickey, you're indicating you did not see a sign either?
I didn't see a sign on Tuesday, no.
Likewise, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, is the applicant on the call at this point?
Yes, I'll move them into the meeting. Okay, they've been moved into the meeting.
Good evening.
Good evening. This is Ryder Rawi from Professional Floor Plans, 4183 Loyalist Drive, Mississauga, Ontario, L5L3W3. Through Mr. Chair, I was there yesterday and I found the sign on the front. I was there myself because we were doing that. They were doing the tree protection and we need to install the private tree sign. And I found that the sign was there. I don't know if it was relocated for a couple of hours, but my understanding is it was there since the beginning. And because we had this like 3 years ago happen in one project, so I insisted on the client to make sure that keep in looking at the sign and make sure that it's there on all the time.
Well, and it is the applicant's responsibility to have the sign up 10 days in advance and until the end of the appeal period. But so the issue here is from hearing 3 of us went out at 3 different times and none of us saw the sign posted on the site. So that brings you into the position of deficient notice for this hearing to proceed tonight.
Yeah, I understand. I clearly understand, but I'm surprised because they install it on time. We send the photos to the committee of adjustment and they acknowledge receiving it. And we got also neighbor support on this one. So I don't see a reason for that. I'm not sure if it was somebody misplaced it for a while, but I don't know. I have no answer for that.
Yeah. I don't necessarily expect you would have an answer, but it is a requirement for the notice to be continually posted, and that is the obligation of the applicant. So I don't see that we have any choice but to defer your application, and it suggests that the application fee or the deferral fee would have to apply to your client, as it's the applicant's obligation to make sure the sign is continually posted. I appreciate your comments. I'll have to turn to the committee and committee members. I guess I'll ask for a vote as to whether this item should be deferred for deficient notice and that the deferral fee would apply. To all those in favor of the deferral? Okay, I'm sorry, sir, but our hands are really tied in the situation.
Okay, no problem.
You'll have to get another date from the Secretary Treasurer, and please ensure that your client checks that sign every day.
Yeah, will do. Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We have no consent applications tonight, so we'll move forward with the variance agenda. First item being CAVA 083 at 2501 Sawet Boulevard.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if I could
Sorry, Mr. Dickey.
bring something that came to my attention. I just don't know how to handle it. But for the property on the South Service Road at 3280 South Service Road.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Dickey, hang on one second. If you're going to talk about that application, I'm going to have to pass it to Mr. Hardcastle.
Yeah, I realize that.
I have the conflict there, so I can't be part of any discussion on that.
Okay, just hold on, Mr. Dickey. I'm going to have
Yep.
to remove the chair from the meeting, and then I'll let you know when you can speak. Just one moment.
Okay, right. Sorry, I didn't realize it was gonna be that complicated.
Okay, Mr. Dickey, you can go ahead.
Okay. On the notice, the map on the notice doesn't outline the property, subject property. It outlines a property that is to the immediate north of the property. Subject property is to the south of the Wycroft Road extension and to the east of McPherson. But the property that is outlined in orange on the map on the notice is bounded by South Service Road, McPherson, and the north side of Wycroft Road. I don't know what problems that introduces, but I just thought I better bring it to someone's attention.
Yeah, that was discovered and a new map
okay.
was sent out. It should have been reflected in the committee's, depending, I guess it was noted the next day. It went out on the Tuesday, the Wednesday, and the information was changed. The mapping has been changed to reflect the property, if I'm going to say on the other side of
Yep.
Rycroft, that's what we're concerned with. But thank you for bringing it to our attention, but 100%, public notice had the new map, the circulation had the new map, so everything to do with circulation and notification should be fine. Are you okay with?
Sorry, then I obviously
No,
did
good
the first
question.
version.
No, better to make sure. Anyways, if that's
Okay.
the end of your question, I'm going to bring the chair back into the
Yep,
meeting.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry for the next time I'll know to double check.
No, that's okay. You can always call me anytime. Okay, just one moment.
Okay, are we ready to proceed with the first application now? All right, thank you. So again, CAV A083 2501 Sawwet Boulevard.
I've moved Ms. McEwen into the meeting.
Good evening, Ms. McEwen.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Catherine McEwen from Corsiac Urban Planning, 277 Lakeshore Road East, Unit Suites 206. Here this evening on behalf of Kaivan. Next slide, please. Subject property is located on the east side of Bronny Road, north of Sawwet Boulevard, generally north of the QEW, and south of Upper Middle Road, and is municipally known as 2501 Sawwet Boulevard. Next slide, please. The proposed development was site plan approved last year. The development includes a 6-story building with 333 units and 2 levels of underground parking, and is currently under construction. Next slide, please. This is an illustrative rendering of what the proposed building will look like. Next slide, please. The South Oakville bylaw requires that visitor parking is calculated based on a ratio of the total number of parking spaces required. We're requesting a variance to reduce visitor parking ratio to 0.18 of the required parking spaces, whereas a ratio of 0.25 is required. For units less than 75 square meters, which is just over 800 square feet, 1 space is required, and for units over 75 square meters, 1.5 spaces is required. Next slide, please. The building has 308 units that are less than 75 meters squared and 25 greater, resulting in a total parking requirement of 346 spaces. With a visitor parking ratio of 0.25, 87 visitor parking spaces are required. The current plan has 398 parking spaces, which exceeds the minimum by 52. We're proposing to reallocate 24 of the required 87 visitor parking spaces to resident spaces, which still leaves 63 visitor spaces. Purchasers have expressed interest in having parking spaces, so the reallocation will allow for each unit to have a parking space. Traffic engineers CGH Transportation completed a parking study in support of the proposed variances, and Mark Crockford from CGH is available should anyone have any technical questions. Next slide, please. All other zoning regulations have been maintained, and we feel that the proposed variance is minor in nature and meets the 4 tests. We did have a chance to review the staff report, and I'd just like to note that in there, for whatever reason, it mentioned that this was a rental building. This is a condo building, units were sold. And in the chart in the report, it stated 60 visitor spaces, whereas we're actually proposing 63. Otherwise, we're happy with the conditions that were in the report. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McEwen. Have you seen the email in opposition, and do you have any comment on that?
So we did see that email, and I understand that they had concerns about the height and parking on Yellow Rose. I think Mr. Crockford spoke to addressing that there shouldn't be any issues with parking on the streets. I understand it's under construction right now. And in terms of height, the actual height is 21.8 meters, whereas 22 is permitted.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll close the discussion and I'll look for a motion on this matter. Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, having heard the presentation, which in part addressed the concerns raised in the letter of objection, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the four tests of the Act. And I'll put forward a motion of approval, subject to the two conditions that were proposed by staff, those being that the apartment building be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated April 13th, 2023, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. All those in favor of the any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve? That is unanimous. Your application has been approved.
Thank you.
You have a good night. People in the audience, CAV A084 at 3232 Shoreline Drive has been deferred, so that item will not be heard tonight. If you are waiting for that item, it'll come back at a later date, and subsequent notice of when that happens will be issued. We will move to 216 Forest Wood Drive, CAV A085. Committee, even though we have one letter of opposition from the Messiahs. Anyone who wishes to speak to this application, you can call in now at 905-815-6095. See, we have Mr. Pfeiffer here tonight.
Oh, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be presenting here today. I'm Jim Pfeffer from 95 St. Clair Avenue West in Toronto. So I'm presenting a new design for this house on this property, and the committee approved a house here in 2022, so 2 years ago. And the staff report says that they think the height and the floor area that we're asking for today is pretty much the same as what was approved by this committee back then, but they think that this house is much more impactful for that than the house that you approved at that time. And I'm going to be talking about that, and I really just don't think that's true. The other thing is the house that you approved in 2022 needed a lot coverage variance. This house doesn't. So you'll see here we've got a central element above the front door, which emphasizes the front entry. But below that, we've got a kind of a longer horizontal front porch, which emphasizes the horizontality of the building, ties into that horizontal belt course. That's the sort of articulation that's called for in the guidelines for stable residential communities. There's a lot of quality architectural articulation to the building. Those window surrounds, the mix of smooth and rough stone, those dormers, which are fake dormers, of course. There's no third story there. And you'll see that the building steps back in plan and towards those side wings. The roof being further away appears shorter. And when we look at the site plan, you'll see that beyond the front, the building actually steps in from both sides as well. So there's a lot of the type of articulation called for in the guidelines for stable residential communities to reduce any kind of impact of massing, and that's exactly what we've done here. If you take a look at the next page, you'll see on top, that's the house that this committee approved in 2022, and you'll see it has that straight eave line. There's very little, it's a much more boxy form. You can see below, we're a little bit longer for the main part of the building, but we've got that hipped roof, which recedes in perspective from all sides. The other building that you approved has that garage off on the right, which was approved for a height of 5 meters. So that was actually a pretty impactful item. And yeah, overall, if you go to the next page, you'll see that's the gable that faces the neighbor who submitted a letter of objection. The one that you approved on top, that gable end, really a pretty straight up wall, very flat. Our house has that hipped roof receding from all sides, that standard conventional eave line. And then you can see we have a kind of a peaky bit in the front, and then off to the left-hand side, our building pushes back from the side. So we're really actually far less impactful to that property. On the next page, you're going to see what this looks like. Oh, there's a site plan. You can see how we are stepping away, further away from the property lines at the sides, at the back. The front, there's a lot of mature trees there. We intend to preserve all of those trees with the construction of this driveway. And another sort of salutary effect of this design, we don't have the garage facing the street, so you don't have the impact of that garage on the streetscape. And also here towards the right, beside the pool, you'll see a tree. I'll show you a photo of that later. Going on to the next page, there's an axonometric drawing, and you'll see that recessed window well sort of highlighted in yellow. We need a variance for the window well and the stairwell there, but it's entirely below grade, no impact. We're asking for a variance for those 2 balconies. They're off bedrooms for quiet, occasional use. They're really small. They're shielded from the yards by being on top of that extension of the ground floor and that canopy. So there's very little view from those, and there's really mature screening all around. So there is no overlook concern generated by those very small amenities for those bedrooms here. If you go to the next page, what you're going to see, we found some other comparable variances in the area. This area is being subject to some redevelopment. And on the next couple of pages, you'll see some, oh yeah, here you can see the footprint, very much in keeping with the area, the patterns of open space that you'll find in the area. Of course, we don't need any variances for setback or length or anything. The next page, you're going to see a lot of circular drives, 2-story houses, very comparable to what you're proposing. You can look at these later if you want, but I just like to get to the 2 more pages down, some photos of the rear yard. Yeah, some very big contemporary development there. There's that tree I talked about that you can see on the site plan. That is a tree on the property line with a neighbor who sent in the letter of objection. So that tree provides some pretty significant screening. There's other landscape screening at the very back. You can see this is a pretty lush backyard. There isn't really an overlook concern. And of course, the owner here just as concerned about privacy and overlook as anyone else. So I think that touches on the heart of everything we're asking for. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeffer. I noticed the neighbor raised concerns about that below grade space and what it's going to be used for. Can you address that?
Yeah, I mean, that below grade space, I mean, it is, entirely below grade. So there is a walkout there that connects to a basement recreation room. I guess you and the committee can probably have those basement plans. So that kind of lets light into the basement recreation room. And it does provide the ability in this case to walk out of that basement recreation room into the rear yard. But there's no, that's what it's for. And then, so that's a stairwell that's towards the back. And then further to the front, there's basically a very large window well that lets light into the basement exercise room or gym. Yeah, I did see the neighbor's letter. I'm not sure what they speculated might be there, but that's what it is. They're essentially a light well. and providing the ability to walk out.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, I see Mr. Dickey, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I was looking in the wrong place, but all I saw, what seemed to be, is more of a landscaping plan. You didn't seem to have a site plan that really easily told me the setbacks on that side, particularly where the window well is. And I'm curious to what the distance is between the edge of that window well and I guess that's the north lot, side yard.
Oh yeah, if we could just take a look at the fourth page of that booklet. So what you'll see is that the distance from that window well, and we're actually getting a variance, so the numbers in the variance, but you can see that's 1.84 meters, so about 6 feet to the edge of the window well. Then at the front of the house, it's 4.2 meters to the house, and you can see that if you bring up page 4 of the booklet. And then as you can see again, as you go beyond that front room of the house volume itself steps back, so it's actually a little bit more than 6 meters from the side property line there. So 6 feet or 1.84 meters to that window well, which is entirely below grade, and you can see that in 3 dimensions. 4.2 to the house, but then the house steps back. And on this plan, there's that kind of orange line. That's the line of the house that this committee approved in 2022. So you can see in that 2022 house, it starts being set back a little bit further from that property line, but it actually just goes straight back, and it goes straight back with that gable. And then on the upper right-hand side, you can see there's that pretty substantial garage, which was approved back in 2022. And you can see it goes, similar depth, that dashed orange line of that house that was from 2022. And the blue line there, that's the existing house with a shed kind of in that location of the window well.
Let's make a comment, bit of criticism.
Sure.
You're coming before the committee with 6 variances. You're dealing with a multi-million-dollar home, but you didn't provide a letter or anything explaining to the neighbors what you're doing. And it's a pretty complex thing. For a neighbor to understand what the 2.4 meter encroachment is and all of that, you can't, that would be unlikely the neighbor would understand that. So, and just like I said to you, I had trouble looking at what I thought was a landscape plan, trying to figure out find the information that I wanted to know. So I set that as some criticism. I think, that's not being very open to the neighbors when you just stand here at the 11th hour and describe what's going on. I'm having trouble understanding it. And I've been in the real estate business for 48 years. So imagine what a neighbor could understand today, listening to what you've just described to him.
Yeah.
Please take that as criticism in the future.
I will, absolutely. Thank you.
Any additional questions for the applicant, Mr. Hardcastle?
Could I ask the Secretary Treasurer to pull up the presentation again? Sorry. I'd like to take a look at that chart that you went over very quickly with the comparables in the area or other situations in the area. There we go. Okay. I'd just like to take a moment to take a quick look at it, if you wouldn't mind. So this chart here is just showing percentage differential.
There's the floor area ratio. So it shows there what was allowed, what was approved, the percentage that's highlighted in red that it was over by, and then the same for the height.
Okay. All right. I'm struggling a little bit with this one. Quite frankly, I don't have a specific question for you at this point in time, but doing an analysis like this, I struggle a little bit with the value that it provides to us, other than that there are variances that have been accommodated for within the area, but doesn't really give us much of an value in terms of understanding the impact of those.
That's true. I think, we like to think that the committee doesn't operate on precedent, but somehow precedent gets raised here all the time.
Yeah,
So
and that's why I asked about the comments about understanding a little bit more. It's about impact, right?
Yeah,
And
of
looking at
course.
impact, and in an area like this where we're seeing a lot of redevelopment and we're seeing relatively large homes on relatively large lots, understanding the cumulative impact of a variety of or a number of variances helps us understand how these pieces come together a little bit. And I think that's the piece I'm struggling with a little bit here, is the cumulative impact of a multitude of different variances and what its ultimate impact is, both upon the character of the neighborhood and the adjacent properties.
And I think, that's why I started here by talking about a particular precedent, which is the 2022 approval for this, particular lot. And I think in that case, and staff has said, well, what you're looking for is essentially the same, but it's more impactful this time. And I'd actually say it's less impactful this time, because that house had basically a straight side wall. It had a really tall gable, so the whole impact of that height went right up to that maximum height at the side gable. And our house is a little bit wider, but it's not at all even close to the permitted width of a house of this lot. It has that really generous yard at the side. We don't have any impact at all of the garage on the street, which I think is a really great thing for these neighborhoods, if you can tuck the garage out of the way. And yeah, and there's just the fact that we have all of that articulation in the facade. If you take a look at that front rendering, you can see there's that sort of front element for the door, that long porch, which actually doesn't quite line up with it, so that creates kind of visual interest, and it kind of stretches one element into the other. Kind of wider central part of the house, and then a significant step back to the two wings. The roof appears shorter because it's further away. And then, at the sides, there's all of that articulation as well. And there's that horizontal banding, the articulation around the window surrounds. All of that, I think, is the type of articulation in the building and massing treatment that's called for in the guidelines for stable residential communities to mitigate any of the impact of these variances, which we are, in fact, asking for. And then I think there's the fact that we took a good look at those trees too, and we're going to do, we want, we're showing those trees as trees to remain. We've located the driveway in a way that's not going to be impactful to those. And I see the staff report show the existing condition, with those trees in front of the existing bungalow. And then we showed our rendering, which just shows the house because we're architects and that's what we show. But those trees are going to be there, screening this and maintaining that leafy green character to this neighborhood at the same time.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, but as a bit of a counterpoint, not that I'm intending to get into a debate here, but some of those elements that are intended to break down the massing, when you consider a couple of pieces, the GFA is fairly significant increase. We're talking about over 700 square feet of space here. You're talking about a building height increase. And you're talking about a visualization of the building, which is appears as 3 stories, notwithstanding that they're false dormers, it appears as a 3-story. So those pieces are quite significant, at least in my viewpoint. And when brought into consideration with some of the other physical elements on site, including a significant amount of asphalt space, and that kind of thing, I'm struggling a little bit with it. But thank you very much for your comments on this. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Pfeffer, I'm leaning towards agreeing with you that this application actually presents better than the previously approved one. I'm struggling with 2 variances. First of all, the balconies. It's kind of hard to meet the intent of the bylaw when they're prohibited. I think this committee's approved one balcony, and that was because it was internal to a courtyard and it had no overlook again over anyone else's property. I guess first question would be whether you considered dropping that request. It doesn't seem that significant to your application. And secondly, on the height, just I think I need clarification. Your elevations present as a flat roof, but in your drawings, you show plans that continue to project the peak of the roof. So is this a flat roof for the full 9.59 meters, I believe it is, height variance you're looking for, or is there a low slope roof behind what you see in the elevation, which is what's causing the height variance?
So to answer your first question, you know, the balconies really aren't central to the proposal, so, you know, I don't know if this committee is in the habit of striking variances, but if you wanted to strike that one, you know, that's something that we're not married to. You know, it's something that, you know, it's not uncommon to see. We thought in this case, you know, you can fit a couple of chairs there. There's not really an overlook concern. And I know we took a house to committee a number of years back and in a similar district, and staff said they were considering in neighborhoods like this where there were some legacy balconies, you know, sort of being a little less finicky about that, which is why we tried to come forward with that today. But, you know, absolutely, I think that's one of the first things that would go on this. In terms of the roof, yeah, so the roof, I mean, it's got the perimeter roof slope, the perimeter hipped roof, and then it comes up to a kind of a uniform level at that height variance level. So it does, you know, that's set back from all sides, but it is, there's no terracing of the roof, as it were.
So the roof line that you see in elevation is the 9.59 meter height. Is that correct?
Yeah, and in the front rendering, of course, it looks lower because that's the way these hip roofs look. Is they do, you know, they do recede a lot in perspective. I know, you know, as an architect, we're working on these things. You put a dormer on what you think is a pretty tall roof, and you know, from the street, the dormer looks taller than the roof just because of that effect of the roof, you know, visually receding as it slopes back. And receding as well in terms of any shading impact and anything else.
Okay, thank you. Any members, any other questions? Mr. Dickey.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the balcony. Do you have any pictures or renderings from the back? I don't know if you showed it in your first presentation.
I don't know. Is there?
There was one that showed it.
Yeah. Well, there's the three-dimensional view. Yeah, it was. Yeah, further down.
No, a bird's eye view.
Yeah. Yeah, there was one. Yeah, so you can see, so the central one there, that is off the master bedroom, and you can see it's, you know, it's very short extension and plan. You can open those doors and put you know, a couple of chairs there. You struggle to put a couple of chairs in the table, and then again off, you know, off a secondary bedroom off on the other side, and on the other side, of course, you're set back considerably from the side property line, just because there's all that extra setback from the to the garage. So the side wall there, and it's shown on our site plan, is, gosh, it's probably about 12 meters from that side property line. So that balcony, you're looking at yeah, probably 15 meters. Oh, actually, I can tell you exactly. That balcony is Yeah, the edge of that balcony is 12.5 meters, 40 feet from that side property line. That's the balcony that's the furthest to the left here.
Okay, I were to walk out on that balcony and hop over that little guardrail, am I at the same elevation, or is that roof, that flat roof, at a different height than the floor of the balcony?
The flat roof, yeah, it's the same roof assembly, so the same joists would be holding that up. It's the same level. Balcony might have, you know, different kind of floor treatment. And you wouldn't be hopping over that balcony. I mean,
Oh, I was gonna ask, why not? How high would that little, I assume it's a glass fence or something around the small balcony?
that would be 42 inches high. I mean, I think the same thing could be true if you just made those French doors with a railing right at the door level. No, it's off. I think these things, when they're off a bedroom, you know, if you have a balcony that's off of an upper living space or something like that, you know, but people I think aren't typically running off, and you'd have no reason to, you know, you've got a pool, you've got this generous pool deck, you've got a ton of space, you know, you've got a rec room in the basement. I don't think anyone's going to be, you know, getting their feet dirty on the asphalt or the gravel on top of this roof, because they need a spot to go. It's yeah, and I think we do, as architects, we do this all the time. I think in Toronto, where balconies are allowed, balcony area is often limited by basically, you know, when there's a bigger roof, you put a railing around it, and that's how you limit the area and the use of the balcony.
2 questions.
Yep.
Is this rendering accurate in the fact that there doesn't seem to be too many trees, no trees in the backyard, the rear yard, and the side yard of the subject property itself, but it's only showing 1, possibly 2 trees in the rear yard of the property to the rear?
No,
You
it's
don't have a photo where somebody stood in the back, where the back wall of your proposed house would be, and look toward the rear yard, so we can see what landscaping there is there, kind of
there
protect the
are
privacy of the people behind?
There are a lot of trees along the back fence line, and you can see them in the aerial photograph. Oh, let's see the aerial photograph, and you can see, yeah. I wonder, you know, if the committee has a survey that's kind of available to be brought up. And there are those rear yard photos as well. But there are the back of this property has a number of very significant trees kind of along that the back fence line. Yeah, and I think yeah, in this case here, you're looking in the bottom left-hand corner, you're looking kind of straight out. There's that gazebo, which is to the right, which is closer to that other property, and then it's looking towards the back. And yeah, you can see there's a lot of it's obscured by these trees in the near distance, but in the far distance, there's a lot of trees as well. There is really significant screening on that to the rear.
And how deep is what's your rear yard setback? Other proposal, not the zoning.
Yeah, the rear yard setback is yeah, over 12.5 meters, so over 40 feet.
Thank you.
All your questions, Mr. Dickey?
Yeah, oh, yeah, so sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yes, thank you, that's all.
Mr. Pfeffer, I'll just add, I know it's only a rendering, but seemed to be a bad choice by the designer. It seemed to show somebody standing outside of the balcony.
I saw that as well. Yeah, and I'll tell you why they did that is because if they didn't move that person further back, you wouldn't be able to see them standing on the balcony from the rear yard. But yeah, but it is a bad choice. I noticed that myself.
Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Dickey?
Wait, Mr. Chairman, I just noticed something and I didn't know, somewhat new at this game, but anyhow, it seems to be a 3-car garage that has 62.53 square meters area, and I thought the maximum was 56 square meters, and I'm just wondering if anybody, does it vary according to how big the lot is? As people know, other members or the town planner?
I think we can ask staff that question.
Thank you. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the maximum is 75 square meters.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I didn't realize the bigger houses had bigger garages. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anybody called in for this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Committee members, I'm going to close discussion at this time and I'll entertain a motion, which just judging by the comments, questions to date, there may be discussion on whatever motion we get, but I can get a motion on this application and we can start that discussion. I guess Mr. Hardcastle. I was about to say, or you could pass it to me to do it, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'll start the ball rolling in the conversation. As I think I've alluded to in some of my questions in my my commentary, I guess thus far, I have some serious reservations in the way the pieces of this house and the site development come together. I think this is really a matter of cumulative impact, the height, the size of the building, some of the site facilities contributing to a building which to me is significant in terms of its massing. And I believe that while there are some architectural elements that have been instituted in an effort to reduce the perceived massing of the building, I believe that they fail in doing so. The building's outside is not consistent with the character, and I don't believe it's compatible with the area. I think that some of the elements I do tend to prefer a side-loaded garage, particularly when it's a 3-car garage. Unfortunately, there are situations where you end up with excessive amounts of hard surface, although not a variance here. Something that contributes to an overall feel of excessive development in this case. I therefore am going to follow with the recommendation of staff, and I'll put forward a motion to refuse the application and the variances, finding that they do not conform to the 4 tests of the Act.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Mr. Dickey, any discussion on the motion?
Just that maybe it sounds, I have a concern with the balcony. The agent or planner or consultant has answered my questions with regard to the side yard situation, but I still have a concern about the balcony. So I would, yeah, I still have that concern. Thank you.
So in a rare case, I'm going to disagree with Mr. Hardcastle. This application, I am convinced from the presentation that this is a more compatible version of the house, more sensitive than what's been approved, with the exception of the balconies. And I could support a motion to approve, with the exception of number 6 for this application. And you know, one of my concerns is the height, but the actual height variance is not the full line that you see. It's a line higher than that, much further back, that nobody other than a bird's eye view is ever going to see. So I'm not concerned with that. And I think the rest of the variances with the design that's been put forward does mitigate any impact. But, so I'm not going to support the motion that's on the floor, but having said that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to deny? Those opposed? That is a 2-to-1 vote in favor of the motion to deny. Sorry, sir, but your application has been denied.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. We will now hear CAV A086 at 2333 Tulsa Gate.
Okay, if you're here for this, if you'd like to speak to this application, please raise your hand so I can move you into the meeting.
Good evening, Mr. Chair,
Hey.
members of the committee. David Mackay, MHBC Planning, 7050 Western Road, Suite 230, Woodbridge, Ontario, L4L 8G7, representing the applicant.
Go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, sir. If I can get the next page, please. So this is a condominium development that is largely constructed through the condominium process. The surveys, as you can see, in terms of the underground parking garage, were conducted. It ended up that, as sometimes happens, some of the spacing of columns and whatnot were slightly off, and you can see that we have 2 deficient parking spaces, unit 188 at 2.67 meters, so 3 centimeters short of the requirement, and unit 341, which is at 1.88 meters in width. We're requesting that those existing widths of those spaces be recognized through the variance. We recognize and agree with staff's condition, putting a note on the condominium declaration for those units, that those are substandard, so that buyers know. I do note that for spot 188, it is still fairly usable, only 3 centimeters short, and most mid-sized cars fit within that space, anywhere from a Mazda MX-5 to an Audi A6 in terms of the width. And the intention, obviously, for 341, because it is substantially substandard, is to promote that and market that for sale for motor vehicle parking, motorcycle parking specifically. I do note that we are overall, in terms of the parking counts, we are more than sufficient. So these are excess spaces, and simply we need to recognize them as legally conforming in order to allow for the sale of those 2 units through the condominium declarations to the purchasers. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Okay, thank you. Before I turn it over to the committee, if anyone wishes to speak to this application, if you can call in at 905-815-6095. Committee members, any questions for the applicant? Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Mr. Mackay. You've answered some of my questions. I have some had some reservations about space 341. I spent some time on the internet trying to understand the size of a car. You know, it's pretty small, and are there? So I see that staff has spoken to, you know, a specific size vehicle, i.e. motorcycle. Has there been a conversation about the restriction that's going to be put on there, about the specific language? Because it really does, like in looking at this, it really doesn't function for anything other than, unless I'm missing something, other than a motorcycle. I just want to make sure that there's specific language that doesn't allow for somebody who's to inadvertently purchase a unit with this parking space and have a false understanding that they could actually use it for a car.
Yes, completely understandable, and we've identified it in our submissions for motorcycle vehicle parking. I confirmed that with my client, and I'm quite happy to work with staff in terms of the language that you put into the declaration. We're currently working through that now in terms of the condo registration to specify that that unit is specifically for motor vehicle or motorcycle parking. So I have no concerns with that if you'd like to modify condition 2 to state that specifically.
Thank you.
Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just very puzzled by something. When you look at the plan, the survey, whatever you want to call it, of the underground parking garage, at the front where the column is for the unit 188, it's actually 2.52 meters wide at the front. It is 2.67 meters to back. I'm just wondering, when we use the word minimum width of a parking space, wouldn't that be considered the minimum width at 2.52?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we had actually identified that in our original variance request in terms of the width being at the front, and zoning staff reconfirmed the variance wording through the review. So that's the interpretation of zoning staff, that it's the width after the columns that is the measurements taken for. Notwithstanding that, sir, 2.52, again, you can still fit many number of cars within that space, as I've outlined in my cover letter.
Okay. Yeah, it's just the two sets of numbers there, front and back, or dimension width, front and back, that I was a little bit concerned about. One thing I might say, we discussed a bit about whether that unit 341, we should use the word motorcycle. I wonder if that's being a little bit too restrictive. I don't know. What are these small, narrow cars that come out? These two-seaters, like
the smart cars.
Oh yeah. I just wonder how. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think I do agree that we maybe should put some more words into the proposed condition. But I just don't know if we should be using particular zeroing in on one type of vehicle, and that's why I was warning these smart cars. I guess they can't get any narrower than that. That would be appropriate. Or any comments from anybody here?
So just on that, I just quickly looked up a smart car width, and it's actually 1.822 meters wide. So it's too big for that as well.
Oh, I see. Okay. See, I'm thinking of you.
I appreciate that, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I could jump in.
Sure.
In my research, it indicates that the narrowest car presently available for sale on the market today is a Chevy Spark. which measures at exactly the same width as the parking stall. So when you take into consideration the door swing for egress and ingress, the stall would not function without utilizing space on the adjacent spots. That's where I came up with my commentary about it, and that's yeah.
Yeah, and maybe the wording is that it's too small for any presently available car. I note that City of Toronto just approved some almost golf cart type vehicles for use on city streets last week, so that could come here too. But I guess I'm gonna, since the questioning is all on the same lines, I'm gonna ask Ms. McKnight. Condition 3 that says the owner provide confirmation that the condominium declaration has been updated to specifically identify all substandard parking spaces to the satisfaction of the town. Is the intent of that the wording of the update to the declaration has to be to the satisfaction of the town, or that they just have to confirm that they've updated it? Because I think if the wording of the declaration has to be to the satisfaction of the town, if that's very clear, that might satisfy Mr. Hardcastle's concerns.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, you are correct in that it is that the wording be updated to the satisfaction of the town.
So maybe just a simple amendment to the condition that the condominium declaration wording has been updated to the satisfaction of the town might satisfy without the need of any serious restructuring if the committee were to approve this application. Any other questions for the applicant? I see none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, then I'm going to close discussion and look for a motion. Mr. Dickey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based upon my review of the owner's application, the site plans, or building elevation plans or underground parking plans, I guess, together with the presentation by the owner's consultant and the planning staff's report, I am satisfied that the variances are minor in nature and conform to the 4 tests under the Planning Act. And I put forth a motion that the application is applied for be approved, subject to the conditions that 4 conditions. Number 1, that the parking spaces unit numbered 188 and unit 241 be permitted in general accordance with the site plan and draft plan condominium plans submitted with the application. 2, that the owner agrees to place a notification that all offers of purchase and sale or an equivalent advising prospective purchasers that parking spaces unit numbers 188 and unit 341 are deficient in size and may not be suitable for all their vehicle types. That the owner provide confirmation that the condominium declaration, and I think we agreed that the wording of the condominium declaration has been updated to specifically identify all substandard spaces to the satisfaction of the town. And number 4, that the approval expires within 2 years from the date of decision of the draft plan of subdivision. Draft plan of condominium application is not approved. I realize that we didn't really address that motorcycle issue in what I said there, but I am open to tweaking that a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Any discussion on that motion to approve? Mr. Hardcastle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only that I will say that your suggestions as accommodated by Mr. Dickey will be satisfactory for me to support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. All those in favor of the motion to approve? That is unanimous. Your application has been approved.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too. We'll now move to CAV A087 at 599 Chartwell Road. The applicant can raise their hand. Secretary Treasurer will let you into the meeting. See Mr. Metaljan. Mr. Metaljan, you're muted. There you go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If we can just quickly get your name and address for the record, and then you can proceed.
Certainly, thank you. My name is Rick Meteljan. My company is SMDA Design Limited. The address is 1492 Wallace Road, Unit 9, Oakville, Ontario. And I'm agent for Support House at 599 Chartwell Road. Shall I begin my presentation?
Please.
Thank you. Support House is a facility that offers support and housing to individuals who are requiring transitional housing, given particular challenges which they're experiencing, which may include homelessness, drug abuse issues, that sort of thing. They've been operating at this site, which is located in an employment zone, for several decades, providing valuable service to the community. There has never been any issues with their use of the site, and everyone who's come in contact with them realizes that in fact they're an indispensable part of the community. The proposal before you is to allow renovations to this building that will have the effect of adding 2 additional bedrooms, but most importantly is designed to create additional common spaces, and also to create barrier-free facilities. So to adapt the main floor of the house to a barrier-free facility, creating a ramp, creating a barrier-free washroom inside the building. And also one of the functions of or the purposes of the work that's being proposed here is to do upgrades to the fire safety and life safety systems. The building at its core is an old farmhouse. It's been, of course, renovated many times, but there's still a lot of issues in terms of exiting and fire separations and with the stairways and that sort of thing. And the purpose of this is to make the building more safe and more secure for its occupants. We require no variances in respect of the building is legal non-conforming because of its use, because the use is not allowed in an employment zone. We require no variances from the standpoint of setbacks and so on and so forth, but we're here before you today simply because of the use, and to ask the committee to allow the renovations and additions that we're proposing, given that residential use, which is not typically allowed in the employment zone. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Metaljan. Anyone who wishes to speak to this application, you can call 905-815-6095. Are there any questions from the committee? Mr. Dickey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unless I missed it in looking at the documents you submitted, I'd like to know what the existing gross floor area is and what the proposed gross floor area is.
To be honest, I don't know if I have that information to hand. I'm sorry. I can guess at it, but I would be guessing. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess how much, like, we talked about 20% increase in gross floor area, would you get? I didn't.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes, I would say about 20%, not more than 25.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned, but we are asked to approve and enlarge. Maybe that's going to be my next question to maybe the town planner also, just to understand about this. We're not approving a addition, we're legalizing the residential use. Is that correct to the town planner or to the consultant, if you want to answer that?
If I may go first, my understanding is that it's a legal non-conforming use, and so the use is presently legal, but the nature of a legal non-conforming use is that there effectively is no zoning bylaw that governs it, and so therefore any change to the site conditions need to be approved by this committee, and so that's what's happening here. It's not that we're asking the committee to legalize the use, because the use has been existing for, as I say, for some decades. The use is legal, not non-conforming, but because of that legal non-conforming nature, any addition or change to the building requires us to come to this committee.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand. I'm still confused, but thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
From the 2001 committee approval on this same site, which sadly I was part of 23 years ago, 23 years ago, it proves that it's been in existence for at least that long, that it's been a legal non-conforming use. And with the test of 45-2, it's really, the committee's allowed an expansion if it's similar to the use that existed or more compatible. Any other questions for the applicant? I see none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in to speak to this matter?
There's no one at this time.
Thank you. And we'll close discussion and I'll look for a motion.
I'm sorry, Chair. May I make one final comment?
Sure.
Thank you. There was one comment that I wish to make to the committee. If the committee looks at the staff report and at the proposed conditions, there's one condition there that we find rather curious and that we don't think is necessarily appropriate, and that's the one that comes from I have a blank here from
Metrolinx.
Yes, from Metrolinx. That's correct. That clearly was something that they inserted, or it appears to be something they inserted because of the residential use, and I can understand them wanting to have that as a condition if this was a condo or rental building or something like that. That clearly is not the case here. So I would ask the committee to consider whether that really is a reasonable condition.
Thank you, Mr. Intelligent. And it doesn't appear that town staff are requesting that condition that was inserted in the letter from Metrolinx. So maybe I could ask town staff to clarify that.
To you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. That condition was not part of the conditions that were proposed recommended by town staff. But if the committee feels that that's necessary, it's up to the committee to decide what final conditions will be.
Okay, thank you. With that, I don't see any other clarifications. So I think Mr. Hardcastle, you had your hand up.
Almost up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having reviewed the materials, having undertaken my site visit, having heard from Mr. Metalligan as well as staff, I'm satisfied with putting forward a motion of approval on this as a 45-2 application. I do find that the modifications and additions are compatible with the existing established area and are essential to the ongoing operations and functionality of the site. So my motion of approval will be subject to two conditions. Those being that the additions be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated September 15th, 2023, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Your application has been approved.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Mr. Hardcastle, I'm going to ask you to take the chair while the Secretary Treasurer once again removes me from the meeting.
Okay, and I will let you know when the chair has been removed from the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, the chair has been removed, or Mr. Tulowski's been removed from the meeting.
Thank you. Now calling item CAVA 088 of 2024 at 3280 South Service Road West. Do we have the applicant or agent on the line or available?
Okay, if they, just one moment. He declined to be promoted into the meeting. Just one moment. I'm not sure. He keeps declining. I'm trying to promote him, and he keeps declining. I don't know what he's doing at their end. I can try once more.
Thank you, Madam Secretary Treasurer.
Okay, Mr. Fay's been moved into the meeting.
Good evening, Mr. Fay. If you would come off mute and introduce yourself and give us your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is David Fay. My address is 338 Lakeshore Road East, PO Box 52147, Oakville, Ontario, L6J7N5. I'm here this evening on behalf of the owner of property being considered in CAV A0882024, and that is Melrose Investments, Inc.
Perhaps you can take us through a presentation and take us through the application.
Yes, thank you very much. This is an application regarding two minor variance requests dealing with a piece of property in Melrose Business Park, which you probably know is south of the QEW, east of Burloak Drive, north of the railway tracks, and west of McPherson Road. And the application is for what is referred to as Phase 3 of Melrose Business Park. The address of 3280 South Service Road is what has been applied to this property in the interim until such time as the extension of Wycroft Road easterly from the existing terminus of Wycroft Road to Bronte Road has been completed, at which point there will be a Wycroft Road address for the Phase 3 property. The request before you this evening is dealing with zoning bylaw 2014-014 and requests relief from provision in table 411.2 that requires a 7.5 meter landscaping width where outdoor storage abuts an adjacent property. And in this particular case, we have, if I could see the next slide, please. Yes, thank you very much. You can see future Wycroft Road extension to the north of Phase 3, 2 industrial buildings proposed on the site, which have been conditionally site plan approved. The location of the requested variances is shown in color. To the left on the screen, you will see in a blue color the area circled for a reduction in the landscape width from 7.5 meters required by the zoning bylaw to 3.5 meters. And in green to the further to the east, you can see the other minor variance request is dealing with a similar reduction from 7.5 meters, but in this case, being reduced to 5.5 meters. And you can see in between the two colored areas of those two minor variance locations, outdoor storage indicated as the land use abutting those two locations. And it's that outdoor storage which requires the 7.5 meter standard in the bylaw, and for which we are seeking relief this evening. We believe both applications, both for minor variance, meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. We believe they're minor in nature and are required for the development of the area, and that they are in keeping with the official plan and zoning bylaw. The zoning for the site is employment 2 and employment 3, and the official plan is industrial for the designation. So we're asking for that relief from the bylaw, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions. Perhaps I should indicate one additional land use. It's fairly obvious from the site plan, and that is the stormwater management pond in the lower right corner of Phase 3, which is an area that has been landscaped itself with respect to the installation of that use several years ago. I should also mention that the property immediately to the west of the westerly boundary of Phase 3 is a property owned by a company known as Mel Wycroft Inc., which is a company related to Melrose Investments Inc. And the development of that lands is being determined in terms of its industrial 3 designation, similar in the designation that is on Phase 3 in terms of zoning. I'm available to answer any questions you may have, Mr. Chair, with respect to these 2 minor variance applications.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. I think you've actually answered my one question: the ownership and intended use of the lands to the west. Obviously, with the stormwater management pond on the other side, the impacts of the reduced landscape area are mitigated to some degree. So that's that was my line of questioning. Mr. Dickey, I see your hands up before I've even asked. Please go ahead.
Didn't want to miss me out. Sick of me asking questions today. Yeah, I have a few. Sorry. I guess the first question I'll come and ask is, you've got about 650 feet of width in that part of the site. Like, why can't you comply with those widths of those landscaping strips? You seem to have sufficient room to do so.
Well, primarily, Mr. Chair, the request is reflecting a practical reality that the 7.5 meters in the zoning bylaw doesn't take into consideration necessarily what particular land use is going to be on the adjacent property. In the case of the easterly minor variance application, the property abuts a stormwater management pond, which has itself quite a bit of landscaping vegetation, and the reduction to 5.5 is reflective of what we would call probably overkill, with something as wide as 7.5 meters next to the stormwater management pond. Similarly, for the westerly minor variance application requiring 7.5 meters, the outside storage will be abutting similar uses on the adjacent property to the west, owned by Mel Wycroft Inc., which will be obviously coordinated given the ownership is similar in terms of the ownership and the legal title to the property held in one parent entity. So the 7.5 again seems excessive in consideration of the ability to provide 3.5 meters, which would certainly, in our opinion, be quite adequate where we're abutting industrial E3 lands immediately to the west.
I kind of agree with what you're saying, particularly with regard to the stormwater pond. My thought would be, well, why don't you put the 3.5 meter wide strip up against the stormwater pond and the 5.5 meter on the west side? Like, it doesn't, if you were to follow that theory, which I can understand, I just wonder why you need to have 5.5 by the stormwater pond.
Well, there is a very good reason for that, Mr. Chairman. The 5.5 is requested because of the grading. The 5.5 can be accommodated because of the grading adjacent to the storm pond on the industrial site. But for the westerly block, the 3.5 is what we consider to be appropriate, and there is no particular grading necessity to have any more than 3.5. And notwithstanding, I take your point that maybe the 5.5 would appear more reasonable on the west than on the east. But in this particular case, the 5.5 in a different world would have been requested at 3.5 had the grading not required the extra 2 meters for the easterly variance. So we're saying we think both of these have been given quite a bit of consideration. We believe they're both appropriate. We believe they met the intention, certainly, of the official plan and zoning bylaw. Neither of them will cause any disturbance or aggravation or any negative impact upon the adjacent land to the west or on the stormwater management pond itself. And so we think they're both appropriate, notwithstanding your question, sir.
Again, you seem to suggest that the lands to the west will also be used for outside storage, but they could be used to build buildings, just like you have buildings in the front of your property. Is there any limitations or restrictions that definitely say that that land to the west is going to be outside storage?
Well, the zoning bylaw permits outside storage. on the lands to the west. And it permits outside storage on the lands we're talking about today, phase 3 at Melrose Business Park. And the committee dealt with a similar request on the block 6, which is just west of block 5 on the south side of Wycroft Road. Both of these blocks were acquired by Melrose many years ago from RioCan that sold them for industrial use. And in the case of block 6, where there are 2 industrial buildings, one now occupied and one under construction, the committee recognized that on the westerly property line next to Sheldon Creek, there was good reason to reduce the 7.5 to a lesser number. And against the stormwater management pond to the south of block 6, between the railway and block 6, the similar reduction was permitted by the committee with respect to that landscape strip. So this isn't the first time that we've come forward requesting the reduction, thinking it is appropriate. Block 6 also had similar minor variances approved by the committee.
Just a little more detail on what you're talking about. So you're saying the block of land west of the adjacent land to you, you're saying on the west side of that is a creek, and you said the landscaping strip was reduced from 7.5 to what?
If memory serves me right, sir, and I believe it was around 3 to 3.5.
So that's like a creek. So that's similar. That we can compare that in a sense to the stormwater pond beside your property. So now we're talking about. Then you said about the CN railway. Well, the CN railway, you're on your proposal. It's a 10-meter landscaping strip. I'd be more interested on what the setback is on the property that you're talking about as a comparison. What's the landscaping setback on its east side?
Just so I'm clear, you're not talking about phase 3, which is the subject of tonight's minor variance. You're talking about the one that was done previously, a year or two ago.
You brought up, I'm sorry, you brought up an example to illustrate that the Committee of Adjustment has reduced the landscaping strips width in properties in the immediate vicinity of your property. And I'm not, I'm just trying to get an understanding. That's great. I'm glad you brought those up. Yeah, I just wanted a little more detail. And I'm saying, so on the property that you're saying, we reduced the width of the strip. I want to know, what did we reduce it to on its east side, which would abut the Melrose or but the property that abuts you?
Yes, I believe, memory serves me right, sir, I believe it was around 3 meters.
3, not 3.5. You're saying
well,
3.5.
I would,
no, I didn't mean to be picky. No,
I have to go back and check,
okay.
but
Yeah,
but it
no,
was
okay.
it was at least 3. Put it that way.
Boy, Sarah, I wish you had provided that information earlier to us. I just don't know what to think of it now. My concern is 3.5 meters is the normal width of a landscaping strip for other types of industrial uses. You're proposing the 3.5 meter landscaping strip width for a use that is an outdoor storage use. You're not differentiating and providing any additional width to mitigate any concerns because of screening or whatever else, of trying to hide that outdoor use from the adjacent property to the west. I'm not concerned about the stormwater retention pond. Don't get me wrong there. It's just this property to the west of your property. That's what I'm concerned about. But that 3.5.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No, that's fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, I did mention that the property immediately to the west is owned by the same entity that owns the property in phase 3 that we're talking about.
Yes.
And that entity has no issue with the reduction in the size of the landscaping width on phase 3, abutting block 5. This entity owns both those blocks and is well aware of what is being requested and has no issue.
I was aware. I mean, I assumed that, and I got your drift that the owner of the subject property is essentially the owner of the property. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And the uses are the same. It's E3 zoning, permitting outside storage for both phase 3 and block 5.
I realize that.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey, Mr. Fay. As there's just the two of us here at this point in time, I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna ask the Secretary Treasurer if there are any members of the public in attendance who would wish to speak to this matter.
There's no one at this time.
Okay, thank you. I have no additional questions coming from the exchange at this point in time. So I guess I can open this up for a motion. Mr. Dickey?
Sorry. I have a problem. It's obviously I have a problem with the width of the landscaping strip on the west side. And I, as a consultant, I understand what you're saying. I understand that concept. I realize that that's an adjacent owner. I mean, that the adjacent owner is the same, essentially the same owner as who is developing the property. But that doesn't mean that 5 years down the road, the two properties will be owned by the same person. And it also doesn't mean it might not be a certainty that the property to the west, the back part of the property to the west will be developed with outdoor storage. I mean, they do have the ability to use that property that portion of the property for other employment uses. As I said, I wish you had provided, details of the next property over there I was asking you about, and those details aren't available, so I questions in my head. My concern or my thought is the normal width when you don't abut an outdoor storage is 3.5. Now we have outdoor storage at the back of your site is proposed, and you're still proposing only 3.5 meter width. So I would put forth a motion that the variances be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Secretary Treasurer, could I ask a point of order here? Some clarification on whether given our quorum, whether I am obligated to vote on this?
You do have the option of abstaining, and then the one vote would carry. Because we've started with the quorum and then with the two of you. Because my understanding is, I know this has happened before with me. I believe you can abstain, and then the motion would carry with the one vote.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary Treasurer. With the motion on the floor, All those in favor? I will be abstaining on this. The motion has carried and the variance has been refused. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just ask a further question. There were two variances.
Sorry,
And,
there's no further discussion. The application, there's a decision been made, so all discussion is closed.
The motion has been made on both matters. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Secretary Treasurer.
Okay, Mr. Chalowski should be joining the meeting now.
Back. Should bring us to CAV 8089 at 1175 Pine Grove Road. We had Mr. Dell here earlier. If anyone is in the audience that wishes to speak to this application, you can call in at 905-815-6095. The applicant can raise their hands. Oh, there we go.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicholas Dell for the record. Harper Dell and Associates. My address for my office is 1370 Hurontario Street in Mississauga.
Thank you. You can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, it's never really my practice to push through when comments suggest a degree of prematurity for an application. However, I'm confident that you'll be compelled to agree with me and that this is appropriate for moving forward this evening for a number of reasons. The first of which I'll explain is that we're seeking one variance for a residential floor area. That's what the four tests are evaluated against. I would suggest that desirability is probably the most important when we have the background discussion with engineering. And there's also another slight blemish in the comments that we received recently related to fire. So I'm going to start speaking about fire because as I understand it, staff and I are of the opinion that the principle of the variance we're seeking today in the design is supportable. This is generally something that you would see as subordinate to lot coverage and setbacks, and we are meeting those requirements on this lot. However, due to the irregularity of its easterly property line, it diminishes the RFA value by virtue of about 23.74 meters square. So I don't think the committee will be spending much of my time, or our time, I should say, excuse me, talking about the RFA itself, but rather the discussion about the overland flow, the easement from Spears, and the in situ grades that flow from back to front on this property, specifically as it relates to the remnant culvert that's located off-site at the neighboring adjacent parcel. So, Mr. Chair, Fire has commented that they are uncomfortable and recommend an increase in the setback on the what's called the plan left side of the property. I think one important feature of today's presentation is going to take place looking at this site plan, but also pages 4 and 5 of the staff comments. Could I ask staff to please go to page 5 of the staff comments, please?
We don't, Mr. Dell, whatever you, did you submit a presentation?
No, I got these
Okay.
comments
Sorry,
prior to that.
Can I just finish my thought?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. Please
No.
go ahead.
So as per
Ms.
the email
McRae.
that you were sent, if you do not submit a presentation, the only thing available at this meeting are the drawings that are available on the website. So the only drawings that will be shown during this meeting are the drawings that were available on the website. There's no access to any staff reports. Certainly, the committee members would have had that information, but that's not available for viewing.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Secretary Treasurer. Then that makes this very easy for you during this presentation because we'll just be staying on this page. It contains all the information we
Mr.
need.
Dell, sorry, if I just, we have the staff comments, so if you wanted to direct us to something specific, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, on page 6 of the staff comments, there is on the after condition number 3, you'll see comments from fire. We've successfully spoken to fire between having these comments and appearing for you this evening. And we forwarded that to Mr. Hassan. Ms. McKnight, I apologize. We've never worked together before, but I did share an email with Brandon. I'm hoping it made its way to your desk, just related to the fire component. They misread the drawings, and it's very tempting to assume how they read it originally, because as you can see on the left side of this plan, block A contains a variety of furniture. There's a planter, there's a deck, and so forth. That is not my client's property. However, the previous owner seemed to enjoy it as though it were his or her or their side yard. And so none of this design that's before the committee seeking the variance for residential floor area is attempting to continue the use of block A. And so I think that, I know that is what fire assumed was part of this application scope, but it is not. All of block A is presumed, all of the furniture from the previous owner's use of that public property is going to be removed. And when we explained that to them after we received their comments, they successfully amended their comments to say we support the application and that comment is no longer necessary. Riley, I hope you received something to that effect, just so the committee doesn't have to take my word for it.
Yes, for you, Mr. Chair, I did receive that communication.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to start there, and that's, again, Mr. Chair, on page 6 of the comments you have, fire says they're seeking a greater degree of setback from the minimum because they thought that furniture in block A was going to remain, but it is not. And so that's one blemish down. And now I want to speak to you about what you'll find on pages 4 and 5 of the staff comments. Page 4 is where we'll start, and it is the second image on page 4 that is the principal concern of staff and the reason that they're requesting a deferral. Mr. Chair, and through you, you'll notice, and the rest of the committee members, that there's a yellow circle around a culvert. That is the culvert that, if you'll scroll down now to page 5, you'll see an aerial image that ArcGIS mapping from the previous McCraney Creek tributary flowing from Spears around the property boundary of the subject site between the neighboring site at 1169 and the subject site at 1175. That is a remnant incomplete easement, we'll call it, that sought to convey flows, I would say, probably in a fashion that the plan of subdivision didn't anticipate, which, as you may be well aware, in Oakville, a lot of these older neighborhood subdivisions didn't have a high enough degree of stormwater management to accommodate all of the new hard surface that infill residential custom homes were going to be presenting. And so I do understand and agree and know very well the process of going through development engineering permit application to seek the appropriate infiltration, percolation rates, and trenching and swales related to maintaining and not exacerbating the grades and drainage for the subject property. And where I think, similar to Fire's review of the application, may has misinterpreted some of this drainage concerns that's being exacerbated by infill lots. So too, I believe staff may be thinking that a land swap of block A would help solve their concerns about this remnant culvert. But I want to note from the picture on page 4 of the culvert, that particular culvert where drainage is currently being maintained from the old McCraney Creek down towards the lake between the two property lines. That's not on the subject site. And so a land swap would have to be taken first with my client's consent, and they're anxious to build their dream home here. And I don't think at this time, without sufficiently progressing the application through a development engineering permit, that we're in a position to suggest that that is appropriate at this stage or not. And you'll remember perhaps from the beginning of today's meeting that my humble, with all due respect, motion to move forward today is because I'd like to get in for that permit with the understanding that we have our zoning approval for the current design. And I believe through that process and through further discussions in the development engineering permit review, we will be able to satisfy staff by maintaining the grades within our property and not be exacerbating this overland flow that staff are concerned about. None of Block A, which is the proposed piece of land that staff seek to do a swap on, is contemplated by our design, all of which Kieran Design and myself, with our experience in Oakville doing DEPAs with the good people at Development Engineering, are quite confident that we can address. And so bringing it all back to the reason why we're before you and the discussion we're going to have about the 4 tests as it relates to the residential floor area variance, I believe it is mature and reasonable to move forward for that reason alone so that we can get into the process. And I think the committee will agree with me, Mr. Chair, that it is very natural for the process to reveal potential changes in design as a result of accommodating some of the conditions of approval, in this case, development engineering, or frankly, just from our own client's prerogative when we encounter challenges that each site face as it presents itself for an infill. And that's our risk and frankly, our confidence in this case with our experience in Oakville. I think it's reasonable. I think there's a bit of misunderstanding with respect to where that culvert lies. And there are, of course, far more powers available and instruments available to staff, whether it's through expropriation or not, to help address this issue further down the line. And so that's the presentation and the materials I wanted to walk you through on the site plan we're looking at together, as well as the staff comments we received recently. And my discussions with staff have obviously always been on a positive note. I'm just politely suggesting that today is important to move forward so that we can get into the permit process and start getting into the more technical design details that staff are concerned about, Mr. Chair. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to go into it at length.
It sounds like you're describing a classic chicken and egg situation. Sounds good at first.
Thank you. Sure.
Was that the extent of your presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So through you, I think there'll be more through discussion, but those are the efforts we've made to come before you today and what we've been able to do since we received the comments.
Okay. Maybe I'll start with Ms. McKnight, see if staff have a comment, as I'm understanding and I'm getting a sense of deja vu about a similar application, I think, in this same neighborhood a few months back, where the applicant was arguing, ironically, I think it was Mr. Kieran, that
was this the one on Wellington?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That the concerns being raised by staff had nothing to do with the variance that was in front of the committee. So I don't know, Ms. McKnight, if you can speak, or Public Works staff can speak to the concerns and whether or not you're swayed by Mr. Dell's presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will defer to Brian. He is the expert on the development engineering side of things here tonight.
Thank you, Riley, and sorry, if I can speak, Mr. Chair, as well as our council. So are you able to pull up the site plan again? Just so it's on screen. So Nick Dell is correct in saying that this is part of a remnant channel of McCraney Creek. McCraney Creek was partially redirected, and there was a remnant channel that flowed essentially through this through this or in between the two properties, 117 Pine Grove, as well as the property to the east. There's currently a private culvert running through the property. The exact location is not entirely determined based on some of the record drawings that we have. There is information to suggest that there is some of the culvert at the rear of the subject property. In general, the thought of the potential land swap is to get this item resolved prior to coming into a development engineering permit scenario. It's very atypical that we would do something like that during a DSP process, as it's kind of a land and conveyance piece rather than I guess a drainage piece. The goal of this land swap would be to facilitate potential, I guess, like channelizing and reopening that flow and having it in public ownership rather than having it under private ownership now, where we are unsure of the entire, I guess, condition of that existing culvert, and we are unsure of the amount of flows being backed up. There is information to suggest that a portion of the Spears Road properties along the south, I guess the south portion of Spears Road that do drain through this site would rely on this private infrastructure, I guess, in perpetuity, unless something was done to, I guess, alleviate that. And again, it is atypical to do this through the DESP process. I will say that if a land swap was entertained, that would essentially make the minor variance potentially irrelevant, and it might not be required. Hence why this portion should proceed prior to going through the development and engineering permit process. And I do agree, it is a chicken and egg situation. I guess I'm thinking that the chicken is, or which one's the chicken and which one's the egg, so to speak.
This, again, seems very similar to another issue we dealt with, that the applicant's not asking for an increase in coverage. And I understand that if he wasn't asking for a variance, he wouldn't be here and he'd be able to get a building permit, but he is asking for a variance. That's why this issue has come up. But so is it, I'm struggling a little with the process. Is it the town's contention that they would want to take a strip off the east side of this property and add a piece off of Block A on the west side and essentially just shift the building envelope over?
That is, excuse me, that is correct. A part of why we kind of want to do this first is because it could potentially impact the variance itself. You're potentially going to have a different RFAs. You may have a different lot area, and there is the event that the RFA may not be required, depending on how that shakes out. This is why we want to defer the application rather than deny it. It would give time to facilitate discussions between Realty, Roads and Corridors, Development Engineering, and the applicant to try to get this sorted. Again, this could come to null, as Nick Dell has correctly pointed out, that it is, it's going to involve the consent of his the consent of his client, and as such, we at least want to have these discussions, prior to this variance going through. If it came to nil, then I don't see how, I don't see how, I guess this variance would kind of play out, because if it does have to go through DESP, we're going to have the same comments, but it is a lot more difficult at that phase, I believe, to proceed with land takings, or at least it's challenging. The answer is it's an atypical process.
Mr. Chair, may I comment on that?
No, let's, you've had your chance. We're getting staff's comments now. We'll get committee questions. You'll have a chance at the end to make any comments that you'd like. Mr. Brigatti, if the applicant were to just apply for a building permit that fully complied, would this still be an issue that would prevent him, or would he still need a development engineering site plan? And is this an issue that would potentially prevent that from being issued until resolved? Or would he just have the right to a building permit?
So a DE or a development engineering services permit or a scoped site plan would be required, as there is the remnant channel immediately downstream of the property. However, I guess the concern is more of the land takings piece, which I'm unsure of the potential to proceed with that piece with the current design. If there isn't a discussion, I guess, before that point, or at least before that application, then the concern is that you're kind of at a stalemate. I don't want to run into a situation where we're essentially at kind of a stalemate without discussions at least being somewhat progressed between the town and the applicant. So we have both, essentially both parties completely informed.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant and or staff? Mr. Hardcastle, you look like you want to say something.
I do. I'm just not sure what that is yet. I'm not sure if Mr. Dickey has some questions while I get my head around what's bouncing around in the empty space.
Okay, I'll give you some time, Mr. Hardcastle.
Go ahead, Mr. Dickey.
To the engineer, the town's engineer person. If we were to approve this today, what changes for you? You can still try to go to the owner and say, yeah, we want to swap land and we'll give you, we'll swap block A for an equivalent amount of land on the east side of his property. Like, what's different? Except that you're not holding a stick over your head. Like, he can go ahead. If you don't react quick enough, you can go ahead and build. Subject to, I guess, other departments' approval, including yours. I just don't understand why we should allow this and delay the development. Town should act as fast as they could. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. If you're modifying the parcel, the worry is that variance essentially changes. And then you either have to reapply or it's not relevant. Because if you're changing the parcel, I don't see how the variance kind of stays. The variance is for this specific block, right? So I would agree, yeah. Yeah. So again, that's why I'm like, this is an issue that would make sense to solve first. Okay, kind of deal. And that, again, that's my my perspective and development engineering's perspective. But understood. I guess that's my response.
If I was the owner, I'd be saying, okay, I'll do this deal, but the town has to pay me to go through the fees for the committee of adjustment and all my costs. And now looking at the same situation, few 10 or 20 feet to the west. So I think that should be a matter that can easily be negotiated in a settlement for the land swap. But anyhow, that's just my opinion. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Mr. Hardcastle, anything yet?
Okay. I think some of my questions have been answered by some of the pieces that have been discussed here. I do have a couple of things, at least the thing that was bouncing around the back of my head. I think that they've largely been addressed, but has there been a point of engagement between town staff and the owner of the lands thus far? Has there been an effort between? Yes.
So there was an initial engagement from planning staff. I believe Brandon reached out to Nick Dell.
No, I meant the owner, though.
Yes, the owner and I had discussions. after speaking to-
This is a question of staff, please.
Oh,
Okay, so not from development engineering staff. No, I'm unsure if Brandon has reached out specifically to the owner. I do know that Brandon has reached out specifically to Nick Dell.
And is there a broader capital project or something like that is umbrellaing this initiative and effort, like that council has allocated funds for, or a scope of project or something like this?
This work is technically related to the Town of Oakville Stormwater Master Plan, but that is more related to the remnant channel piece. For these specific works of securing lands and mitigating risk through private infrastructure, I can't speak to a specific project that has been approved or greenlit.
Okay, so, but it might fall under the broader master plan, which could afford you the authority to engage in activities that may require additional efforts or approvals by council. It's kind of what you're saying, or the way I'm hearing it.
Not specifically. Again, I don't think I'm informed enough to provide an answer to that specific piece.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the applicant or staff? Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I am looking at the proposed wording of the conditions and wanted somebody to explain to me why these conditions are so much different than our normal conditions.
This would be the appropriate time to ask.
Oh, what?
I'm not sure if which staff is best equipped to answer that, but
Okay, well, I'll just read the condition, which I haven't encountered before. And it's that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the final approved development engineering permit application to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Service. Now, we've rarely have seen a condition like that before. So why is this different? And why should we impose that condition? If that.
right. So I'll let staff respond. If memory serves, we kind of put that condition on the Wellington application that we approved. So
Okay.
That's where it's coming from, but which Ms. McKnight or Mr. Rigotti, who'd like to take a shot at this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't mind getting started, and then Ryan, if you'd like to hop in as well, then you can add on as you'd like. But if a deferral is not granted, we would request that those conditions identified be included in the approval. We would request that condition because this will require the owner to go through not just a high level overview of the building permit stormwater review, but a development engineering permit application, of which is a little bit more in depth, but not a full-blown site plan application. And this would allow for staff to look at this item more in detail. And then the minor variance agreement condition, which is, I believe, just below that, will enable the town to impose clauses and conditions on the applicant to satisfy to the town that the stormwater is being properly and efficiently controlled on private property. So these clauses and conditions would come through the development engineering's technical review of the DEPA application. And the minor variance agreement would essentially enable the town to secure positions and rights to inspect and repair that pipe if need be. Because as discussed right now, as it sits today, there's municipal infrastructure under the private property, and with no easement or permissions for the town to fix it, it would be completely a private issue. So if the minor variance agreement would be proposed to resolve that, the minor variance agreement would help to resolve that through potentially an easement or other form.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Brigatti wants to add to that before Mr. Dickey, you respond.
Yep, I just wanted to clarify that the culvert in question is not public infrastructure, it is private infrastructure. We are unsure when this culvert was filled in, or sorry, since the culvert was filled in, when the channel was filled in. This would have happened, I guess, over the years, because this original development was from the 60s. So the culvert would have been filled in after that date, and we are unsure if that was through the consent of the town. That is just something to keep in mind, and it is particular why we are trying to, I guess, take some of, or facilitate some of those land transfers, or have that ability to have something in public ownership that can be publicly maintained.
Mr. Dickey?
But you seem, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Dickey, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. To the engineer, I thought you indicated in your earlier presentation that you don't know, you actually, well, you don't know if the culvert's actually on the subject property. From the photo at the front, it definitely is not on the subject property at the front.
It appears to be skewed. That's why I said I don't know if it is completely on, or Nick Dell did indicate that based on this, especially the front, that it appears that it's not on the subject property. However, we have information suggesting that there is the inlet at the back of the property that is crossing over. So we don't know how much it's straddled, and we don't actually know the full condition of that pipe because it's underground.
Just one other question, just to get a little history. Are you suggesting that when this subdivision was originally constructed, that was an open ditch and the owner put it into a pipe and leveled the land?
I am not suggesting that the current owner did that.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah. Keep that in mind.
I didn't mean that. I mean, a previous owner, yeah.
Yeah, that would not be in the town's interest to fill in that area. It is unclear if it was coordinated between both landowners. It is unclear if it was one or the other.
But it might have been done by the developer back in the 60s or whenever this subdivision was created.
Likely not impossible. So it's not something that we would have been interested in. We don't like. Looking at old subdivision drawings, it does show essentially an old channel basically straddling the property line. Beyond the culvert and in the works with that, we don't have any information other than kind of rough as-built or rough as-built of where that channel location is, as well as the street view based on the I guess the Google Street View. If you were to look like just kind of like on the property, you can see where that outlet is into the ditch.
One more question. This will be it, Mr. Chairman. When we were dealing with Wellington, there was a stormwater master plan, and it indicated that the Wellington Street property was subject to flooding. Is this property also subject to flooding in the regional storm?
So it's under the stormwater master plan, it's actually not entirely clear. The immediate downstream of that culvert is where one of the remnant channels that actually leads into that Wellington system is, and you can see the 100-year flood limits downstream. It does not speak to the upstream piece because it was enclosed by that culvert, so it's unclear to the extent of flooding. We do have an approximate I guess area that we think would be draining through this culvert. I mentioned previously that there are the rears of the Spears Roads properties that are on the south of Spears Road. Some of them do drain through the system. Some of the backs of the Pine Grove lots likely do drain into the system, as there's like a small little ditch system in the back that kind of drains through. And it is unclear the extent of overland drainage through there. If there is a major storm that does go through this area, it would be blocked by the culvert. and could cause potential flooding, but we do not have specific flood limit information that is concrete that we could provide.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Mr. Rigatti, I'm going to ask the applicant similar question on the conditions, the 3 conditions that are approved by planning staff. If the application were to be approved tonight, does that give you comfort that there's a process at which to, deal with this issue? What I'm struggling with is a deferral on a matter that's not dealing with the actual variance we're dealing with tonight, leaves the applicant with no process. If the town and the applicant don't agree, I don't know where he goes other than to come back and be in a similar situation. It seems to me that the conditions that staff are looking at give both the town and the applicant a process to follow, and I'm gonna say it because I think it's going there regardless of what the committee's decision is. Somebody or everybody's going to appeal the decision, but at least there's a process that both the town and the applicant can avail themselves of. So, long way to get back to my question, whether or not you feel that these 3 conditions provide enough comfort to try to resolve the concerns that you're raising.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you.
All right, now, Mr. Dell, that first was directed at Mr. Grigatti.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then I'll ask you whether or not you're comfortable with those conditions if the committee were to approve you and impose those. But we'll start with Mr. Grigatti.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Actually, I think I understood where Nick Dell was coming from there. So I guess my only concern is how that, if we were to engage in that land swap proposal, how that would take place and how that would essentially leave the variance moving forward. That is my primary concern. Moving forward, if we were to go through the DSP process, we will be able to raise similar concerns. However, I'm unsure if the process would allow us to proceed as necessary to accommodate those land takings. That's not something that I'd be immediately familiar with. The deferral was specifically, I guess, targeted at trying to have discussions essentially engaged with the owner, the planning consultant, our legal team, development engineering staff, and the roads and quarters group to see where this sits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dell, the 3 conditions that staff have suggested, I'd like to hear your comments on those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies to all the committee members. I guess I've been going a little blue in the face, jumping in at the wrong times, and so I don't mean to come across as impatient. It's also tough not to interrupt people online because there's a bit of a delay. So, Brian, thank you so much, first of all, for staying late on a Wednesday night. It's always good working with you. I do have some reservations about the conditions, specifically as it relates to the minor variance agreement. I do understand under 45's 9.1 that the act allows the committee to require the owner to enter into an agreement with the municipality to ensure completion of conditions. Where I have reservations is twofold. One, the issue of redundancy. If I accept the condition of ADIPA, then I am going through that process. And so an agreement to make sure I agree to a condition seems a little redundant. I'm happy to accept the condition to go through DEPA. I'm happy to accept general accordance with the drawings and the expiry. However, I'm a little bit nebulous on the contents of this agreement, especially as it relates to what I keep hearing about this land swap. Mr. Hardcastle, through you, Mr. Chair, asked a question of staff that I improperly tried to answer about the owner's instructions to me and if the owner has been engaged on this. Brandon was kind enough to reach out to me before his comments were due to discuss the land swap, and I had lengthy discussions with both the owner and Joris Kieran from Kieran Designs about the nature of the swap and frankly their rights as a property owner to try and build their dream home and what that means for their timing and what that means for their permit process. That's the most important thing to my client. And having experience being in expropriation scenarios, there are instruments that are still available to staff outside of the minor variance process, outside of these conditions that will still allow them to solve and approach my client for a land swap, which I will pause there and say patently that my client is not interested in consenting to a land swap. The reason being, and you can see this by virtue of the photos for the engineering comments, as well as the bias angle of the eastern property line, that follows the culvert that's on the neighbor's property. And therein lies, I think, some of the prematurity of these comments. And I recognize that and appreciate staff's ability to try and have these discussions offline. But there's nothing stopping us from continuing these discussions if we approve the variances for the residential floor area. And so, apologies, but coming back to your question, the condition about the minor variance agreement, if it stipulates that we enter into these discussions for land swapping, I feel a little bit bullied because my client is not consented to that. It's its own process. There are an appraised value. There are fees. There are perhaps just a straight swap. But because we have very competent information based on our legal survey, our site visits, and the discussions and instructions from our client that this culvert is not on our property, it convolutes things to involve our neighbor that we don't have control over. And so the essence of control for getting my client's dream home underway, not necessarily approved in spite of staff, but underway through a process is more important to me and more germane to the committee's time. And so I would move, Mr. Chair, to accept all of the conditions other than the minor variance agreement, because I don't know the contents of that, but it seems like it's twofold. One being the development engineering, which we're fine with. The other being the land swap, which makes me uncomfortable because my client has given me instructions that they don't wish to go through with that.
Well, I'll comment on your comment, but I don't want you to respond because we don't want to get into back and forth debate here. I can take a different view of condition number 2, as I think it's helpful to your client.
Okay.
It doesn't talk about requiring a land swap, it talks about an agreement. That agreement may be that the town gets an easement over the side yard for maintenance of that culvert if it's determined to be on your property, and that would then negate the need for a land swap. So I think that, and I believe Mr. Rigatti, raised the issue that one of the concerns of the town, that if there's the culvert there, the underground flow, that the town wants rights to maintain it if necessary. And that's the kind of thing I believe these kind of agreements can address. So I'll just leave that for your consideration.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if that's the case, fine with it. Truly, I'm just worried about it being, forcing us into a land swap when the municipality has every right to expropriate. So thank you. And if, of course, in an expropriation, it's impossible to leave us in a deficit. So were this to be approved and expropriate, it wouldn't create an undoing of the variance. So that's just for my comfort also going forward.
And you indicated in your desire to move forward tonight that you realized it would be at your risk if the variance somehow, whatever the resolution was, caused the variance to not be valid. You'd have to come back and get another one. So
correct. And that may happen even without these conditions. That's sort of natural to the more technical review that the permit process reveals.
Okay, committee members, any other questions? Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anybody called in to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Sorry, Madam Secretary, if you said something, I did not hear it.
Oh, sorry, there's no one at this time.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to close the discussion, and a lively one at that. Not a cut and dried situation by any means, but I'll look to the committee for a motion. Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based upon my review of the owner's applications, site plan, building elevations, my site visit, together with the presentation of the owner's consultants and of the planning staff and engineering staff down in Oakville, I am satisfied that the variance is minor in nature and conforms to the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and I put forth a motion that the application as applied for be approved, subject to the conditions. I'm just going to say this. I don't agree with the 3 conditions. I'm going to propose only the 2 standard conditions. The first condition would be that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated April 23rd, 2024, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date decision of building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey.
Sorry, I didn't hear. So only one of the conditions, and then you have your own condition?
Mr. Dickey moved the 2 standard conditions that.
I don't know what the 2 standard conditions are. There wasn't 2 standard conditions listed.
Sorry, I'm referring to the ones that normally go. What Mr. Dickey indicated, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that it will be subject to 2 conditions: that development proceed in general accordance with the site plan and elevations, and that a building permit issue within 2 years. Mr. Dickey, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
and the date, I just mentioned the date.
And
Right.
the date was?
April 23rd, 2024 for the plans.
Thank you. Okay, so we're removing, well, at this point of his motion, the planning's requested condition 1 and 3 are not to be included. Is that correct on your motion, Mr. Dickey?
Correct. Not number 1, not number 2 of the planning department's recommendation. Correct.
No, not number 1 and not number 3.
No, 2.
Correct. That's right.
You have the general one in accordance with the drawings, April 23rd, 2024, and then the approval expired 2 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Hardcastle, any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. Just not sure what I need to say here. No, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit concerned both with the conversation that's occurred here in not affording an opportunity for a good and reasonable conversation to implement, to assist in implementing on a site-specific basis the stormwater master plan. Efforts to undertake investigative works to understand the implications of development, notwithstanding that the minor variance is not directly related to, it is allowing to an advance development which could potentially impact upon an unknown situation. And I think that the committee should be affording the opportunity to allow for those investigations and opportunity to allow for the town to achieve the outcomes that council have directed them to with regard to stormwater. I am concerned with a property owner who's unprepared to address those requirements when addressed, where it could have significant impacts upon their property and other properties within the immediate area. You know, every 2 weeks we sit here in front of, and hear applications in these general areas in the south part of the town. And we hear significant commentary about stormwater issues, about the impact of new development on adjacent properties from a stormwater perspective. And I think we have an obligation to afford an opportunity for the town to do the work that they need to do to deliver on an outcome. I do appreciate that it's not directly related to the minor variance at hand. But I do think that we should seek to try to support staff in trying to deliver on these programs. That being said, the conditions as they were written by staff afforded an opportunity for processes that would allow for them to do so, and the motion that's in front of us takes away those opportunities to deliver on those outcomes, or at least the chances. I won't be able to support the motion on the table because largely because of the modifications to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Mr. Hardcastle, I tend to agree with what you said. I struggle with denying an application for a reason not for the variance that's in front of us. I also appreciate the staff concerns, but I'm not comfortable with, you know, a deferral and no process for the applicant or for the town. So I'm not going to support Mr. Dickey's motion. I would support a motion that imposed the 3 conditions that staff have asked for. And as I said earlier, I suspect there could be 2 appeals to however we deal with this, but it gives both the town and the applicant a formal process, and nothing gets you to an agreement quicker when you've got timeframes and processes that you have to deal with. So my personal view is that staff's conditions would be the way to go. So with that, I'm going to call for a vote on Mr. Dickey's motion to approve. Sorry, Mr. Dickey, go ahead if you'd like to speak to your.
I'm just thinking here. So if we call for a vote, we're just, I mean, like saying we're questioning the condition. Is it possible for us to say we make a motion and we're saying we're okay with the application itself, but we're questioning the condition? I didn't want to deny this fellow deny him because we're quibbling over conditions. That's what I was getting at. So if we vote now and you deny my motion, what's our next step?
So there's two opportunities here. You could take Mr. Hardcastle's comments as a friendly amendment and amend your motion to include the 3 conditions as requested by staff. If you stand by your motion based on the comments heard, I think your motion will fail, and then I'll be looking for an alternative motion.
Oh, okay. I didn't. Yes. That's what I wanted to know. Okay. I stand by my motion. I was a real estate appraiser for 48 years, and dealing with expropriation, they drag on forever. So I don't think that's fair to the owner to drag on this. With regard to why I was eliminating the engineering requirement there, I was under the impression that that's a normal situation anyhow. You have to get a permit from the engineering department. So that's nothing new. Why should we stipulate that in our committee of adjustment when it's a normal situation? It might not be normal, the actual geography of what's happening here, but I got the idea. I was under the impression that it's normally, an engineering permit is normally required when you go for a building permit. If I'm wrong there, okay. And the last one, I just don't see why the owner should be burdened by whatever that means. I have no idea what it means, but it's not standard. I don't see why we should put in something like that that's not standard. I don't think, again, the owner should be burdened with this. This is something between the town. And remember, the culvert might not be on his property. So why should we put him on this? Let's have the town come through with their and decide figure out where the culvert is and deal with it as quickly as they can to allow this fellow to build. And if we give him a committee of adjustment approval and the town, they do the swap, of course he has to come back for another committee of adjustment if that new house doesn't fit on the other lot. There's no question in my mind. It's a new subject property. So anyways, I stand by my motion and those conditions, but I under the understanding that if it is denied, we can then come back and change the conditions and take another vote. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dickey. So I'll call for a vote on the motion to approve with the 2 standard conditions. All those in favor? All those opposed? So that motion fails. Mr. Hardcastle, I'm going to look to you for an alternative motion of some nature.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you've heard, I have some reservations with, and I think that the owner, I'd love to afford the owner and the town a chance to deal with this matter before the committee deals with it. But, you know, I do believe that the conditions will afford that. And as Mr. Chairman stated, getting to the point, as he does so well, it does afford a process which I think is appropriate and fair to both the public and the individual interests in this situation. Accordingly, I'll put forward a motion of approval subject to the 3 conditions as proposed by staff. Those being that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the final approved development engineering permit application to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, that the owner applicant enter into a minor variance agreement and pay any applicable fees to be registered on title in accordance with section 4591 of the Planning Act to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, and that the approval expires within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued. I would note, given that we've spent all the conversation talking about process, I want to make sure for the record that I advise that I believe that the requested variance seeking an exceedance in gross floor area or residential gross floor area is minor in nature. I think that there is a sensitive design to the building that addresses any concerns that I would have. And so I therefore think it meets the 4 tests and these conditions are appropriate for implementing.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Mr. Dickey, any discussion on that motion?
I could live with including the engineering permit. I can't live with including that last number 3. I just see that's imposing something on the owner that I don't think is justified. So I would vote against this, but I would, if somebody were to come around and eliminate that, I'd be all for it. Or I would go with it. Here's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. I'll just very quickly, I'm going to support the motion. I think staff have brought reasonable concern that there is an issue here that needs to be dealt with. And I think the conditions that they're asking for provide for a reasonable process, and I believe and hope for a solution. But as I said earlier, both sides will do what they need to do with this decision, however it turns out. So I am now going to call for a vote on Mr. Hardcastle's motion to approve, subject to the 3 conditions that were requested by staff. All those in favor? All those against? So that passes 2-1. Mr. Dell, your application has been approved with the 3 conditions. I thank everybody for the detailed, thoughtful discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Same here. It's going to be tough to sleep tonight, but I appreciate it.
Thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, do we need a motion to go beyond 10?
I believe it's 10:30.
10:30, okay. We better be done by then.
We could do a motion. I'm trying to think. I'm having a brain cramp after all that conversation. I believe it is till 10:30, because that's usually what I put the meeting, our actual meeting, our Zoom meeting, till 10:30.
Okay, we'll take that as guidance to get done by 10:30. AAB A6061 at 153 Ulster Drive. We have, I guess, 3 letters of opposition and a request to attend. So if someone is still watching and want to speak to this application, please call in at 905-815-6095. See Mr. Razzolini. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Marco Razzolini from Sakura Design Inc., 94 Lakeshore Road East, Unit 201, Mississauga, Ontario.
Okay, please proceed with your presentation.
Sure. So the application is for a new 2-story single detached dwelling in place of the existing single-story bungalow. We had deferred our previous application to work with planning to reduce the massing on the streetscape by eliminating the 2-story porch entranceway. We're now proposing a single-story porch. Through this coordination, we also eliminated the height variance and reduced the eave height, further reducing the massing on the street. The proposed variance we are seeking today are for increased width for the allowed window well encroachment, increase in RFA, and a reduced front yard setback. The first variance is to allow for an increased width for the window well encroachment. The purpose of the increase is to allow for a larger window and window well to bring in increased light for the space below the garage. This is an area of the plan that would otherwise be quite dark. Because the garage floor is flush with the ground, lower than the first floor, there's not a lot of opportunity to get light into here. So our thought was we could have a larger window well on this side of the dwelling, larger window to bring light into the space below the garage. Variance 2 is for an increase in RFA, and it's to allow for an increased living area for the owner's personal needs. The dwelling is intended to be a multi-generational home, and the owners require additional living spaces on all levels to accommodate their family. The second floor specifically is proposed with adequate space for 2 adult couples and 2 children, where everyone has their own personal areas. The requested percentage, although I understand not part of the consideration for approval, is consistent with the approval at 155 Ulster Drive. That application was approved with an RFA percentage of 40.59, which is similar to what we're proposing, just to show that the application is consistent with the ongoing built context and transition into newer houses in the neighborhood. Variance 3 is for a reduced front yard setback. This variance is requested to transition from 155 to 151 Ulster. Ulster Drive in this location runs southwest, with the lots on the southeast side of the street on properties that are not 90 degrees perpendicular to the street, as well as the houses that are on these lots. As a result, the front yard setbacks are not consistent along this side of Ulster. This is most notable between 155 as well as the subject site. So between 155 to the front of the existing bungalow right now is 7 meters to the garage face, and then beyond 7 meters to the front of the actual house. So we've tried to offset the transition, or make up for this transition, by locating the house somewhat in between 155 and 151 to kind of articulate that transition a little bit more seamlessly, rather than the subject proposal being set back 7 or 8 meters from the front of 155. We feel that the proposed location kind of acts as a nice transition into the existing streetscape. That's it for the presentation. I'd be happy to jump in and answer any questions from the committee.
Just before you stop, is there more to the presentation in case people are watching? The site plan elevations that can be scrolled through? You didn't ask to come off. Okay, so we can.
Yeah, so the site plan is probably the one that shows the front yard setback the best.
Back one?
Yes, there. This one here. So if we're looking at this, 155 is to the left of the page. The current house right now, if you were to zoom in on this, there's a kind of a light gray dash that cuts across the front of the dwelling. That's where the current house sits. So we're pulled up closer to the street than where the current house sits, but it's kind of in a transition place between the property to the left being 155 and the property to the right being 151.
And this would appear to be the subject of the objections from your neighbors.
Yes.
Okay, if we could just scroll through the elevations so everybody has a chance to see what's being proposed here.
Yeah, and I would note for the front elevation, speaking with planning, we had initially proposed a 2-story front porch entranceway. We've reduced that down to 1 story. We've also reduced the eave height. We brought that down. We eliminated the height variance. And in order to have decent sized windows on the 2nd floor, we've just popped up these small window dormers into the roof line.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, any questions for the applicant? Mr. Dickey.
Once again, sorry, I have to keep asking questions here. When you look to the page that has all the statistics, when it comes to residential floor area, there's a note at the bottom that says, include the garage exterior walls open to below at the ground, open to below at the 2nd, stairs at the 2nd, and the elevator at the 2nd. What's my understanding of the definition of residential floor area, you do include the stairs and you do include the elevator. And I question whether the open to below at the ground, which is a open to below would be to the basement, that should not be that should not be deducted in calculating the residential floor area. So what I have calculated, the residential floor area is about 381 square meters, and that reflects a residential floor area ratio of 42.5%. I just asked the consultant if that I'm interpreting something wrong in the planning. Am I interpreting something wrong about the stairs and the elevator, or whatever? Anybody can help me there, explain to me. I've been wrong before tonight.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we received this feedback from the zoning technician that intook the application. They provided red line drawings to us and showed us exactly the areas that they wanted included and removed. And those were the areas that they had flagged. I had always, we had always assumed that those areas that you had just mentioned wouldn't be included, would be included. But the zoning intake technician was very adamant that they were, and it's coming from the city, so we didn't push back on it too hard.
But the document that the applicant submitted actually says that these areas were excluded. I'm not looking at something and trying to guess whether they're there or not, because often the applicants just say this is the residential floor area, and we kind of just have to assume it's correct. In this, you're reading the note, and to us, that's not residential floor area. That's something else.
We were asked to include this note, and we were provided with red line drawings when we submitted for C of A, requesting that those areas are removed.
So you included that note. The planning department included that note on those statistics. Is that what you're saying?
Not the planning department, sorry. The intake technician, I believe he was from zoning. They provided us red line drawings. They also directed us, because we had a note in that same area that you're referring to that just mentioned does not include garage area. They asked us to update that note, as well as provided a red line drawing, which I can forward at a later time that showed them removing those specific areas because they had come back to us and said, well, we're calculating a different number than you. And we're like, we're very confident with the numbers that we're proposing. Can you send a markup to show it? And he sent over a PDF. It excluded those areas. And he also asked that we update the note on the stat sheet here.
I don't understand. When you look up the definition of residential floor area, like it's defined in the bylaw. How can your zoning people come back and say and redefine it?
It was the town zoning people.
As Mr.
Yeah,
Dick,
yeah.
I think we have to accept that the applicant's answer to your question is it is the way it is because they were directed by zoning staff to do the calculation that way and address the note that way.
If I
Okay,
could
thank
also
you.
add that if we are approved and there's an issue when we go in for permit, then I think we'll address it at that point. If there's a discrepancy in the calculation, either we'll need to come back to committee or we have a discussion with zoning staff to understand what the mix-up was.
Okay, well, I'm relieved that you're aware of some type of a mix. Okay, thank you. I've made my point. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? I'm seeing none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anybody called in to speak to this application?
Yes, I've moved them into the meeting.
Okay, I'm seeing
Christina
Capelli
yes,
Lopez.
correct.
Good evening.
Hi, guys. Hi, good evening. I've never done this before, so I'm a little nervous. I don't want to upset a potential new neighbor. But I am a concerned neighbor. There's already been a house built on our street that looks similar to this and is right next door to this home. And it's impressive, not in the positive way. It's very prominent. It looks too big for the lot. And I am fearful of that taking over our street. I'm also a new build on this street who stuck to all the rules during our build. So I am a little sensitive to a house that's asking for a larger RFA, more width, and more front yard, or I guess an incumbency on the front yard setback. So I would like that to be taken into consideration of a neighbor's point of view, because I am fearful for my neighbor to the left and the right, should this get approved, of what that impact will be on my home in the future.
And can we get your address, please?
147 Ulster Drive.
Thank you. All right, if that's all you wanted to say, I appreciate your comments. Committee members, do you have any questions for the neighbor? I'm seeing none. Thank you for your presentation. Mr. Razzolini, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to the comments made by the neighbor.
Yes, so speaking specifically to the front yard setback, I think this is something that's very unique to this property. As mentioned, the house at 155 is set back much closer to the street than the neighbor on the right side of us, right side of the page at 155, much closer to the street, 151, pulled further back from the street. We're trying to make that transition a little bit more seamless. So in terms of this setting a precedent, I don't think that would necessarily be the case. I think it's very unique to this specific property. The request for RFA, again, this is a personal request for the owners. The increase is pretty minor when compared to other applications that have gone before the committee, and is pretty much exactly what was approved at the neighboring property. I can't speak to the, how the rest of the neighborhood could evolve based on that.
I guess the concern seems to be that you'd be putting the one neighbor in a bit of a hole behind the two-story wall with the reduced front yard setback. The one side is a transition behind. The concern, I guess, from the neighbor is that their house would be behind the wall now.
So right now, the wall that the subject site would have, it would be 9 meters approximately if we were to build in line with where the existing front wall of the house is. So we're kind of trying to mitigate that so that there's a little bit of a wall caused by 155, and then we're in the middle. And then, you know, if you look at where the covered porch comes out to for 151, we're maybe a foot in front of it, and then there's just a single story porch projection that pops out in front of there. So front yard setback, I don't think is creating too much of an adverse impact on the streetscape. If anything, I think it's adding some logic to the streetscape, where right now it seems like there's a pretty big jump from 155 to the subject site.
Okay, thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, let's ask again if anyone else is called in.
No, there hasn't, but if you wouldn't mind reading out the 3 letters, the names of the 3 letters in opposition.
We have Beatrice Crow, a George Nickel, and Mandy and Vic Sahota. And we just heard from Christina Cavelli Lopez.
Can I just add one more thing here?
Quickly, please.
Just that all those neighbors were all in a line, and like it all impacts our home and our front yard perspective. Mandy and Randy, like those are my next door neighbors that lead up to the subject home.
Okay, thank you for that context. Okay, I am going to close discussion on this matter and look to the committee for a motion. Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based upon my review of the owner's applications, site plan and building elevation, together with my site visit and the presentation by the owner's consultant, having regard to the comments and objections from the neighbors, I am satisfied that the variance is minor in nature and conforms to the 4 tests under the Planning Act. And I put forward a motion that the application is, as applied for, be approved subject to the conditions that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated 24/04/22, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision, the building permit not being issued for the proposed construction.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Is there any discussion on that motion? I see none. I'll just add, seeing that we had this fair amount of opposition related to the front yard setback, and I understand the concerns, but having seen and listened to everything tonight, I've come to the conclusion that I think the reduction provides for a more appropriate transition in the streetscape than if we would make the applicant comply with the existing setback. So with that, the motion on the floor is to approve. All those in favor? Okay, so that is unanimous. Your application has been approved, sir.
Thank you. Good night.
Right. Final application for the evening, CAV A139 2023 at 340 Pine Grove Road. If anyone wishes to speak to this application, please call in 905-815-6095. If the applicant can raise their hands, they can be let into the meeting. I see Chris Marchese.
Good evening.
Evening.
Fellow committee members. Can you guys hear me?
Sorry, if we can get your name and address for the record, and then you can proceed with your presentation.
Yes, no problem. Name is Chris Marchese, 185 Legion Road North. Here on behalf of the property owners of 340 Pine Grove Road. Won't take too much time. I submitted an opinion letter for the committee to review. But I think the context is important on this application. Originally in October of 2023, we came before this committee with variances related to height, gross floor area ratio, eaves, height, lot coverage, along with the garage and the rear yard setback. At that time, staff were opposed to the application. I discussed with my clients and we recommended deferral on the file, requested deferral, and were granted. Since that time, I've had time to work with the property owner to drastically reduce the impact of the proposed dwelling. I've worked with Ms. McKnight through this process to make sure that staff was satisfied with the revisions. The opinion letter does stipulate and state out all those revisions and the eliminated variances as such. The key goal before coming back to the committee was making sure that planning staff were in support of this application. We are now here in front of you today with supportive staff with no negative comments, with only one new variance, which is the gross floor area to 43.6, which we've drastically reduced, and then 2 requested variances under section 45.2 of the Act for gross floor area of the garage and then the rear yard setback. Happy to answer any questions. In my opinion, it meets the 4 tests under section 45.1 and the requirements under section 45.2 for the remaining 2 variances. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can again ask staff just to scroll through the presentation in case people are watching that haven't seen the elevations. Okay, thank you. Mr. Marchese, can you clarify for me? I think you referred to it as a 2nd-story addition. So the ground floor of the existing house is going to remain in place and you're just building above it?
Correct. We're actually building right above it and to reduce the rear yard setback to make sure that the addition was compliant with all zoning requirements related to setbacks. We've actually reduced the rear yard to the 7.5 meters that's required. So the rear yard setback is only existing on the 1st floor, but the 2nd floor is compliant.
Okay. So you're not going down to the foundation, you're just knocking off the 2nd floor, rebuilding the 2nd floor. And
from a construction perspective, not totally clear on what the plan is. From the public notice, it does look like they are considering it to be a new build, but I know that we're going down and following the existing footprint of the dwelling, but not sure on exact details of construction at this time, if we're going right down to the foundation or just building on top of the existing walls that are there today.
Your submission called it a 2nd floor addition.
Yes.
But if you're knocking it down to the foundation, that sounds like a new build.
I can confirm with you right now and ask my client for clarification if you deem necessary.
I guess what I'm struggling with is you're asking for, if you're knocking the house down to the foundation, you're asking for variance for a legal non-conforming use, but then you're going to knock that legal non-conforming use down. And I don't think it works that way.
Yeah, I know the rear yard is staying there. So that wall is not being knocked down.
Right, but you've got a garage in excess of the current bylaw. If you knock that garage down, I don't think the legal non-conforming use applies to it.
Correct. No, sorry, just to clarify through you, Mr. Chair, we are keeping the walls. We are not going straight down to the foundation. I've confirmed with the client. So everything in terms of the garage area and the rear yard setback would be under section 45.2 of the Planning Act.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, committee members, if you can indulge me with a further related question to staff. Ms. McKnight, last year, the staff report indicated they did not believe this was a section 45.2 application and it was addressed as 45.1, but the current staff report addresses it as 45.2 and 45.1. Can you explain the inconsistency between staff's position?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the application that was submitted to town staff this time around, we did take at face value. Last time around, we did indulge in further investigation into the property to confirm exactly whether it would be determined under 45.1 or 45.2 this time around. We decided rather than digging in to confirm whether the application was correct, we would review the application at face value and continue from there. Being that the variances were reduced and modified and the massing and scale of the dwelling had been adjusted, town staff were satisfied that the changes proposed were suitable and addressed previous comments relating to massing and scale concerns, and that is the reason for the support provided tonight.
That it doesn't answer the question as how did the staff opinion as to whether, if I heard you correctly, staff looked into it the first time and determined it was not a 45.2. Staff didn't look into it the second time and took it at face value that it was. That I'm having a hard time understanding that logic. And I guess I have to ask the question, what is your opinion? Is this a 45.2 and 45.1 application or purely a 45.1 application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is difficult for staff to confirm whether it is under 45.2 or 45.1, and that is why we took the applicant's word for what they were proposing to do on the subject property. As such, that is why this time around we did look at it through 45.2 as well as 45.1.
I'm not sure how staff determined it wasn't once and it was like second time, but I'll leave my questioning at that. Mr. Hardcastle, I think you had a question.
I think you've Mr. Chairman, I think you've poked around at the same thing that raised my eyebrow. You've raised the same points as I have. I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Mr. Dickey, any questions?
Yes, I kind of had the same question that you did, Mr. Chairman. I won't go on with that, but there's a couple other things, of course, I come up with. Into the consultant, I just want to check that I understood. On the second floor, on the second story, the rear yard setback, which is to the west side, will be the 7.5 meters. Is that what I understood you said to say?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. The second story is compliant with the rear yard setback requirements for the zone at 7.5 meters.
Okay. Another thing, just on this question of tearing down walls, it's my understanding from what reading the plans that the rear one-story addition in the northwest corner has a crawl space, but the proposal is to turn that into a basement. So are you not then tearing down those walls and dealing with that foundation wall in order to construct that basement, or are you somehow doing it inside the house?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not on the construction side, so I don't have exact details. But I've confirmed with the client that all walls are remaining on the first floor. So anything that will be done will be maintaining that. In terms of exact details of construction, unfortunately, I don't have that here in front of me today.
We have another thing, and maybe it's a comment for later. Let me just think. Okay, I'll say it. Maybe it's not right, but maybe I'm concerned about the mass and scale, not the, to look at the 43.6% residential floor area ratio is one thing. But then if you're looking at the mass and scale, we often say, oh, you know, there's an open to below area and it's quite big. And in this case, I calculated it 17.3 meters squared. And then you look at the garage, and the garage is bigger than normal. I'm not questioning about the variance or anything else about the garage. I'm just questioning about the amount of space and massing. So the garage is is 26.5 meters bigger than what would normally be allowed in a house according to what would normally be allowed by a zoning bylaw. So you've got 17.3 square meters of additional open to below the 26.5 square meters of additional garage. That brings you up to an effective residential floor area ratio. I'm just saying effective visual of 49.9%, whereas the zoning bylaw would have allowed, just a minute, 40%. It's quite a bit bigger in the massing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that those things I brought forth were not. I'm not saying they weren't permitted. I'm just looking at the massing side, and those things, those larger elements in the house make the house look bigger. I'm just wondering if the agent had any comments on that. On my thought.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. What we do is through this process, I work with the zoning examiner to make sure that I understand how it's calculated. And a big recommendation to my client was to make sure that the second floor was fully compliant with all setbacks. We didn't create any lot coverage variances through this. We eliminated that. The second floor as of right can be placed in that position. Obviously, we are increasing the GFA, but in terms of overall massing and relative to the streetscape, you're on a corner lot. You only have one neighbor. The garage isn't going to be 2 stories above it. We're backing onto a park, meeting the second story, this rear yard setback of the second story, with much visitation between the park and that westernly property line, which is considered as the rear yard. So in my professional opinion, I don't think this creates adverse impacts. When you drive the neighborhood, there's many large dwellings in the area, and the gross floor ratios are relative to what we are proposing here today. So in my opinion, the massing, it respects and reinforces with the mansard roof and the new streetscape that we've provided with some architectural features that further enhance that front elevation to ensure that the massing is broken down and not impactful on the street. And fortunately, Ms. McKnight agrees with that opinion as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Marchese, just so I'm clear, when I asked initially about the ground floor wall staying in place, you said hadn't been determined, but now you're saying the ground floor walls will remain in place. Because while I don't understand the inconsistency in the staff report on the 45-1 versus 45-2 issue, in my view, the only way you can deal with the garage variance and the rear yard variance as a 45-2 issue is if those walls remain in place. And it almost beckons a condition requiring that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, at the time of your initial question, I was unsure of the exact construction methods that were taking place. I have been able to connect with the owner, and through his word, who will be dealing with the construction, I am confident in the fact that going through section 45-2 of the act is the right approach due to the fact that the walls will be maintained during construction.
Okay, thank you.
And one last thing I just want to note before you guys go into discussion, we did have support on the previous application of 18 signatures. So it wasn't as part of this application, but we've also reduced the impacts and reduced many of the variances, which I think is important for the committee to take into consideration as part of this application.
Okay, thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time, and I just want to note there is 5 minutes left. I don't know what happens if we just get cut off right at 10:30 because of it being remote. So actually, it looks like we may have 7 minutes left. I don't want to rush anybody. I don't know whether they'll cut it. It'll stop right at 10:30, or we're going to get a bit of leeway time. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks. But yes,
Okay.
no, nobody's called in.
Okay, then I'm going to close discussion and look for a motion. Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have I have some reservations with respect to this application on two main fronts. One, and that's what you've been, you had raised some concerns about, is this a section 45.1 or 45.2 application? I'm not sure that we have an appropriate application at hand, whether we're dealing with this under the appropriate sections. I think there's been some uncertainty expressed with that. I'll highlight that, but I do have some immediate concerns that I can address directly related to the variances that are at hand. And those are, at the end of the day, the built form massing of this building, it continues to be massive in my mind. The numbers may be may have been adjusted, and there may have been some efforts made, but this continues to be a significantly large building with significant exposure around an interior corner that only highlights the mass of this building. I do not believe that this conforms to the four tests of the Act, nor do I believe that it would be without impact. Accordingly, I'll put forward a motion to refuse the application.
Mr. Hardcastle, any discussion on that motion to deny the application? I see none. I will comment that I share many of Mr. Hardcastle's concerns, including, I think, the transition on the second floor was applied to the wrong end of the dwelling. It should have been to the open street corner, not to the park. And I'm equally uncomfortable with the staff position on the 45.1 versus 45.2. So, motion is to deny the application. All those in favor? That is unanimous. The application has been denied, sir. Sorry. We have confirmation of minutes from May 15th. Mr. Hardcastle. And motion to adjourn at 10:27. Oh, Mr. Dickey beat you to it, Mr. Hardcastle.
Sorry.